Good afternoon. This is a committee of the Legislative Oversight Committee hearing, and we are dealing with resolution number 200485. And before we begin this hearing, I'd like to recognize Ms. Samantha Williams, Esquire, who will read a required announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand that state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings of City Council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, and Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearings and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. Everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this hearing is being recorded. Because this hearing is being recorded, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in this meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to Councilman Jones recognizing members for questions or comments they have for witnesses, I will note for the record that at this time, the chat feature in Microsoft Teams may be used for members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. And at this point, will you please call the roll so that we can see who's in attendance, and will members who are here please say a few words so that your image will appear on the screen.
Councilmember Green. Councilmember Gim.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to my co-sponsor, Kenyatta Johnson, and good afternoon, colleagues. I'm looking forward to this important hearing.
Good afternoon, Member Gim.
Councilmember Jones, Councilmember Johnson, I am here and present.
Thank you for your attendance, Member Green.
Councilmember Thomas.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I'm present, and thank you to the Vice Chair and the sponsor of this bill. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Member Thomas.
Vice Chairman Squilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Present.
And Chairman Jones.
Present. I see a note for the record that a quorum is present, and this hearing will now come to order. Ms. Williams, will you please read the title of the resolution?
Resolution number 200485, a resolution authorizing the Committee on Legislative Oversight to conduct hearings to examine findings of racism, nepotism, and mistrust within the First Judicial District as set forth in a recently revealed report by the Center for Urban and Racial Equality.
Before I recognize the sponsor of this resolution, one of the things that and I appreciate Member Johnson bringing this to this level of attention and making sure that, for the record, that all branches of government treat its members, employees, and the citizenry fairly, equally, under the letter of the law, and then also of the spirit of the law. You don't have to look far to the state of New Jersey and see what can happen when people are not protected or feel protected in their jobs, but also at their homes. A federal judge was assaulted at her home, and her child lost their life. I think it's important to note that this was not just a one-time occurrence. We've lost 3 federal judges over the past 4 years. The U.S. Marshal's Office has noted thousands and thousands of threats and terroristic threats against court judges and officers. So this is something that we have to take seriously, and I'm thankful to Member Johnson and co-sponsor Gim for bringing this to our attention. And with that, I'd like to recognize the prime sponsor of this resolution, Member Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you for your opening remarks, kind of putting in context why we are having this issue, why we are having this hearing, and some of the issues that revolve around this issue. And also, most importantly, I want to start off by just addressing the critical importance of why this hearing was brought today. It's not about one branch of government versus another branch of government, but it's about transparency and addressing the issue of institutional racism in our First Judicial District, and making sure that those judges that work in the First Judicial District, those staff members who work in the First Judicial District are supported, their voices are heard, their issues and concerns are addressed. And when we talk about the issue of institutional racism, we recognize that it's an issue that we cannot be silent about. The absence of President Judge Ida Fox not participating in this hearing today, the absence of her not sending a representative to participate in this hearing today, is indicative of the environment that has been taking place over at First Judicial District. Her absence and a representative absence exemplifies that Black judges don't matter. Her absence and her representative absence exemplifies that those Black staff members don't matter. This issue is so serious and so critically important that to not have a representative here participating and for the most part, addressing the issues and concerns around institutional racism is totally unacceptable. Nevertheless, we're still going to continue to move forward and address the issues that we know are very, very serious as relates to institutional and systematic racism here in the city of Philadelphia, but also across the state of Pennsylvania when you talk about this issue, as well as throughout the United States. The CURE report, in which we will do a deep dive in today, is an objective report that was done by outside third party. And the results of that report talked about the issue of nepotism, mistrust, and institutional racism within the First Judicial District. And as an African American who grew up in the city of Philadelphia, who recognized that 90 to 95% of those individuals that go into that court system are Black and brown people, it exemplifies why we must stay on top of this issue. We must be diligent in addressing this issue and perform over at the First Judicial District. And so with that being said, Councilman Curtis Jones, Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to provide opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Member Johnson. If we can't keep our judges safe and the court officers safe and the witnesses safe, and there is no justice, and we can't keep that system. So I hope that this will come to a head, that it will be discussed. Sometimes you have to have uncomfortable conversations, and you have to get better at being uncomfortable so that you can get to some solutions down the road. And I hope that that is a result of what we're taking the first steps on. So, Ms. Williams, can you please read the names of the first panel to test? Well, before I do that, are there any other members of the committee that wish to offer opening statements? Hearing none, Ms. Williams, will you please let us know who the first panel to testify are?
The first witness will be Dr. Judy Lubin.
Are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome. Please state your name and begin your testimony.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Judy Lubin, President of the Center for Urban and Racial Equity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Councilman Johnson, and members of the committee for the opportunity to offer testimony on the First Judicial District Equity Organizational Assessment Report. I'm a sociologist with 20 years of experience partnering with people and organizations to advocate and implement policies, programs, and practices that confront racism and produce equitable outcomes for marginalized people and communities. CURE is a research, training, and consulting group based in Washington, D.C. We're a team of researchers, strategic planners, and facilitators that build the case for change through research that documents gaps and identifies opportunities for action. The CURE team has strong ties to the city of Philadelphia, including a team member who lives there, and I personally have family in North Philly. And so this work and the work of trying to transform FJD is really important to us as a team. In the fall of 2018, CURE was contracted by FJD to conduct the assessment and provide training to the court's leadership on equity and inclusion topics. We have led close to 15 organizations and government agencies through a process we call equity organizational change. That includes a comprehensive organizational assessment, formation or creation of a working group that receives training from CURE to build shared language and analysis of equity concepts, including institutional and structural racism, power, intersectionality, and white dominant culture. And following the delivery of the organizational assessment report, we help working groups move through a process of developing an action plan to address the areas for improvement that are noted in the report. This is the same process that we conducted with FJD, but were unable to carry out in a way that would have supported FJD in implementing necessary changes outlined in the report. For the person, and I will go into this a bit more in a few minutes. For the purposes of the assessment, we defined equity as the proactive creation and enforcement of practices, policies, values, and actions that produce fair and equitable opportunities, treatment, and outcomes for all, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, and other forms of differences. Organizational assessments to us provide data for action and a roadmap for informed dialogue, goal setting, and transformational change to take place. We like to say that the assessment process is like holding up a mirror, allowing organizations to engage in critical self-reflection that needs to take place before moving into an action planning process focused on race, equity, and inclusion. The CURE team used multiple research methodologies to understand to what extent equity is being practiced at FJD. The assessment included a staff survey completed by 670 FJD employees, focus groups with 23 staff members to provide additional context, as well as a survey completed by 45 judges, along with interviews with about 7 members of court leadership. For the staff survey, 51% of the staff identified as white and 49% people of color. Black staff represented the majority of those that classified as people of color, 32%, with another 4% identifying as Latinx, 1% Asian, and 11% multiracial. Now I'll go over a few findings of the assessment focusing on organizational culture, racism and discrimination, and then some recommendations. In the areas of organizational culture and commitment to equity, we found that while staff stated that FJD included culturally diverse employees and that there was a culture of belonging, when we drill down on issues of equity and inclusion, we see the ratings diminish quite significantly. For example, on questions related to leadership at FJD, employees perceived leaders at FJD as only demonstrating a mild commitment to equity. Staff generally disagreed that leadership includes people from diverse racial or ethnic backgrounds and rated FJD's leadership low in their participation and support of issues about racial bias, gender bias, and biases experienced among LGBTQ people. Judges tended to rate the culture, hiring practice, and staff diversity higher than FJD staff. And we find that this is a common finding in our studies, and that we often see that people in leadership positions have divergent perspectives on what is happening in the institution and are often disconnected or unaware of the harm being experienced by Black and brown staff, junior staff, and staff with marginalized identities. But the judges didn't have a ringing endorsement of leadership and culture at FJD. We found that female judges and female judges of color in particular were more likely to rate FJD's leadership's commitment to equity much lower than white female judges, white male judges, and male judges of color. Other data that we outlined in the report provide supporting information that female judges of color are also experiencing bias and exclusion at FJD. For example, when we look at the communications and decision making at FJD, we find judges of color, particularly female judges of color, rating FJD significantly lower and stating that they had felt out of place at work because of their race and gender. And we see similar experiences reported by women of color on staff as well. One important element of organizational culture and practice at FJD highlighted in the report is the issue of nepotism. Nepotism was a strong and consistent theme that we heard in working group meetings and in focus groups. In all three focus groups, staff brought up nepotism without being prompted and within the first few sessions of these groups. We heard many stories of employees being hired without going through normal channels, of employees coming into work and being told to train a new employee who had not been interviewed for open positions, but hired because of someone with influence internally or externally to FJD. And we heard about instances in which managers fired an employee only to see them back in the office a day or two later because someone with influence intervened and overrode managers who had more direct knowledge and experience with the employee's job performance. Nepotism has contributed to a low morale among staff and a sense that the playing field at FJD is unfair, favoring those who have relationships that allow them to gain positions and stay in those positions when dismissal might be warranted. As we noted in the report, these dynamics often reinforce racial inequity in that historically Black and Brown people have not had access to networks or social capital that produce the types of inequitable employment opportunities we heard described by FJD staff. Moving on to experiences of racism and discrimination, it's important that we know that when we talk about racism, at least from the CURE perspective, we are talking about racism through a systemic racism lens. And this is a lens that goes beyond the legal framework of employment discrimination and explicit forms of discrimination to include things like microaggression, for example, subtle and implicit questioning of intellectual or professional ability, and white dominant culture where Black and Brown employees feel uncomfortable because of their race and cultural backgrounds. With that said, when we queried FJD staff on whether they felt uncomfortable at work because of their identities, few employees reported experiences of discomfort or discrimination because of their gender identity, sexual orientation, disability status, religion, educational background, or age. However, we found that nearly 20% or 17% of FJD staff reported experiencing discrimination or discomfort because of race or ethnicity. Staff of color at FJD and focus groups, for example, reported experiencing racial microaggressions, including incidents in which they were ignored in meetings and feeling the need to justify their meriting a promotion after advancing to a higher position at FJD. Interestingly, there was no major difference between people of color and white respondents reporting feeling uncomfortable because of their race. When we drilled down and looked at the qualitative data, for example, in open-ended survey respondents, we observed that several white employees expressed racial resentment and made claims of reverse racism, which may explain the comparable level of white FJD employees reporting discrimination because of their race compared to employees of color. Because my time is limited, I want to move on to recommendations. The report highlighted a number of serious issues at FJD. We find that institutions in our work at CURE are struggling with the same issues highlighted in the FJD report. We're working against 400 years of racism and inequality that has been embedded in institutions, including government. And we're only at the very beginning stages of institutions really recognizing that they have to move beyond diversity and representation of Black and Brown people in the workplace to really focus on undoing racism and other injustices that have shaped institutional and organizational practices. In terms of recommendations, first, I would encourage FJD to reconstitute the working group that was created as part of CURE's engagement with the court. The working group, to our knowledge, was one of the first or rare instances of which there was a cross-court collaboration at FJD. However, the group was not empowered to make recommendations that would be seriously considered, in part because there were no members of court leadership on the working group. We found that when working groups lack members with decision-making power, actions recommended by the working group are often questioned or not taken seriously by organizational leaders. Maintaining a race, equity, and inclusion working group is a critical part of building structures for addressing the issues highlighted in the report. The working group should be tasked with developing an action plan with clear deadlines, performance indicators, and accountability. The working group we worked with developed a preliminary draft action plan that should be revisited by the newly constituted working group. We also would recommend that the working group include staff across the organization, including judges. Time will need to be spent building relationships and creating a working group culture where equitable decisions can take place so that every member's voice and contributions are valued and staff do not face repercussions for speaking honestly. In our work with FJD, we perceive a strong power differential between staff and judges. FJD must actively work to distribute power across the organization in order for equity to take root. Indeed, that the working group agreed, and in many conversations with Judge Fox and Judge Allen, they had also agreed that the report should be shared before a decision to be made by the governing board not to share the report is an example of this power imbalance that must be challenged at FJD. At CURE, we believe equity cannot be achieved without transparency and accountability. In all our engagements, we encourage the release of the assessment report to staff. The assessment is a critical part of the change process, and the people who participated in the assessment must be a part of that process by having a chance to review the report and contribute feedback on next steps. One of the next steps that we advised for FJD was to have peer learning conversations with other court systems that have undertaken efforts to address race and other inequities internally. These change processes can feel daunting, and we encourage knowledge sharing and vulnerability and asking for guidance from others with experience gained from undertaking similar efforts. We also would recommend, and recommended in the report, a full audit of hiring, retention, and advancement practices with attention on racial and gender equity. And then we also encourage, that was not in the report, but looking back and reflecting and preparing for this testimony, FJD should develop and encourage affinity or employee resource groups, for example, for Black staff, women, and LGBTQ staff. This is an increasingly common practice among large institutions and companies to support equity and inclusion, and it helps to distribute power across the organization in a way that facilitates diverse voices to be heard, visible, and consulted on organizational change and decision-making processes. FJD should celebrate its diversity and welcome opportunities to support staff seeking to create spaces of safety, support, and learning based on their identities. During our contract with FJD, CURE recommended that a program developed to train staff on institutional and structural racism and other equity issues that included a train the trainer component designed to institutionalize the trainings at FJD. Most staff indicated in the assessment that they had not received any equity, diversity, or inclusion training. Moreover, staff reported that their knowledge of equity, diversity, and inclusion topics to be low or moderate. Training on race, equity, and inclusion should be a priority, especially for staff that directly interacts with residents and for managers and court leadership. Our contract included the provision of training to leadership, including judges. After delivering the report, CURE presented a training plan to Judge Fox and to Judge Allen and revised and submitted that plan in October of last year based on our conversations with the two judges. In an effort to fulfill our contractual obligations to schedule and deliver the proposed trainings, we sent several emails to both judges which were unanswered. CURE submitted a letter to the court administrator, Joseph Evers, on February 11th of this year, requesting that our contract be terminated due to failure of the court to comply with material terms or conditions of our agreement, specifically non-response from the court. We later received a letter approximately a week later noting that the contract was terminated due to budget reasons. As FJD pursues the strategies that we recommended and that others will recommend, We highly suggest that a staff person dedicated to overseeing and monitoring the implementation of these action items be hired. Unfortunately, far too often these positions, such as Chief Equity Officer or Chief Diversity Officer, are set up to fail or not provided with the resources or autonomy to facilitate the transformational change that needs to happen. So to avoid these outcomes, we would highly recommend that FJD take care to make this a senior level position with a budget and authority to make decisions that will not be undermined or overturned by court leadership. This role should be a highly visible position with touch points across courts to help bridge silos at FJD. Organizations are comprised of living, feeling people who can make or break a change effort. Without inclusive processes that facilitate engagement of employees in decision-making and shaping the future vision of the organization, equity efforts can encounter resistance and lack the support needed for effective implementation, as we have seen unfold. This is especially true when there is a history of or recent experiences of staff, especially employees of color, reporting low morale, being treated unfairly, and poor communication from leadership on how and why decisions are made. In closing, I'm encouraged that the court has external and internal champions who are invested in FJD becoming a court system and workplace committed to fairness, equity, transparency, and accountability. And it is significant that the council has taken up this matter to ensure that FJD begins the important work of transforming its culture and practices so that all staff are situated to access power, opportunities for advancement, and have the individual skills to practice equity in the workplace and with the community served by the court. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. If I may, and first of all, thank you for your important work. All right, can everyone who is not testifying put their microphones on mute, please? Sometimes it's very uncomfortable going to a doctor's office to get examined. You get to show the doctor the warts and the blemishes, but that is all a part of a process of getting better. If you don't get the examination, you don't know how to get the cure. And so thank you for the kind of work that you and your organization do. I want to ask a couple of quick questions. In the process, did you identify a diversity officer, similar title, similar responsibility within FJD? Was there such a person?
There was not such a person. When we were contracted, there was an intention to hire a person at the end of our engagement. And however, what we were told was that because of budget reasons, that position likely would not be hired. So,
for transparency, I am a Pennsylvania Human Relations Commissioner. So now, if I ever see any of these cases, I'm gonna have to recuse myself, but it's worth it. So let me ask a couple other questions. In your analysis, was there a differential between? So there were three categories of employees at FJD. There was the judges class, if I read it right, and then there's a manager class, and then it was more like rank and file staff. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And go ahead.
Yes, that's about right.
And in that analysis, there were different perceptions held by different levels of those staffers. Is that correct?
Yeah. So in our analysis, we mostly compared FJD staff as a whole and the judges that participated in the separate judges survey. We did look at, when we looked at staff, we did look at position levels and the courts or departments in which they were located, but we didn't find any significant or notable differences between how staff across FJD reported, particularly in terms of position levels, when we look at FJD staff, not including the judges.
second question. I think you gave a stat of 49% people of color and 51% or so of people of non-minorities. Is that correct?
Right, who responded to the survey, yes.
Of those classifications, was there a differential in pay?
Yes, absolutely, and we highlight that in the report, right? We saw consistently that staff of color, but particularly when we did the analysis by race and gender, right? We really see those differences come out where women of color consistently reported having different experiences and perceptions of the organizational culture at FJD, differences in perceptions of opportunities for advancement, to what extent that FJD is actually taking additional efforts needed to bring in diverse staff within the organization.
So by way of the 59-41 split, what is the differential average amount of pay difference between the two classifications?
So that's something we did not study, right? So that's a salary compensation study, which is a completely different study. And that, well, I wouldn't say completely different study, but it's a more extensive study that we encourage FJD to conduct so that you can get a fuller picture. And so, and that includes, looking at salary compensation across a number of years across positions or position titles to really get a good understanding of what's happening, particularly if there are any disparities in compensation by race and by gender.
That is a very important stat that we need to find out. Secondly, are there any difference in those classifications in promotions? So if there were clerk typist 2 and then there's clerk typist 3 openings, was there a differential in race in who was promoted to those positions through classifications?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'd be limited in being able to respond to that again, because we did not conduct a salary analysis. But certainly we collected qualitative data, right? So in focus groups conversations and in responses that people provided in open-ended survey comments, right? That there was this perception or a sense or lived experience that they were sharing with us that there were these differentials. But, again, we would highly encourage a salary compensation study that would provide that type of data.
And finally, and I'm going to pass the mic over, how many filings for discrimination were there to the city's human relations, state's human relations, or federal human relations folk that came out of FJD?
Yeah, so we did not receive that information. Part of our process is typically a document where we request those types of data. We provide the client with a list of documents that we would like to see to really help us assess and get a really clear picture of what's happening within the institution. And so we don't have that data in terms of complaints or filings related to employment discrimination.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Johnson, did you want to ask questions at this point?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to also thank Judy for her hard work on this report, which is very, very informative, and it's really just a reflection of where we're at in our society when it comes to addressing the issue of institutional racism. There's a couple things that you mentioned that really stuck out. One was the lack of response regarding the information that you requested, which resulted in you terminating your contract, and the resistance as relates to providing the information that you needed to do a thorough and complete report, which it is very thorough, but being supportive of your overall mission to through this report. And so for me, I recognize that, again, this is a missed opportunity for the leadership from FJD to provide this information in this hearing in a very transparent and collaborative way. Because at the end of the day, beyond addressing the issues as it relates to Black judges, beyond addressing the issues as it relates to Black staff members, again, the majority of people who actually are serviced by FJD are people of color. My constituents and every council member who sits on this board, on this committee, constituents. And, you know, it just begs the question that if you aren't taking this issue serious on a higher level as it relates to your employees, right, the judges and the staff, then what's the perception and the attitude toward the people that actually come in front of the judges, the people actually come in and out of the building who are service? And so can you give me an idea as it relates to any of your recommendations? Have there been any follow-up to say that these recommendations that you put forth are being worked on? Or are you any preliminary conversations to do contracts to move forward as it relates to executing your recommendations?
So we recently heard from FJD about 2 weeks ago inquiring about providing training related to implicit bias. And so we are scheduled to have a exploratory conversation later this week.
And you also note in your report that there are a number of FJD employees that believe racism does not exist, but that it exists primarily against white people. And your experience is bias training enough to address this issue? And what other options are available to address attitudes of this nature?
Yeah,
I think someone kind of mentioned that, yeah, institutional racism is like a thought of our imagination, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we like to tell our client partners that you may think of yourself as this self-contained institution or organization, but people come in to your institution living and swimming in a society that's built and structured on racism. And so people are bringing these ideas into the workplace. And we've seen, particularly over the past 10 plus years, this increase in the sense of racial resentment. Particularly, we've noted this, sociologists and others, right, after the election of President Obama, right, this rise in racial resentment. And so when we see these types of responses in organizational assessment surveys, we're not surprised, right, because people are coming into the organization bringing these ideas. And so as an organization and as an institution begins to really try to work on building equitable policies and practices and culture, a lot of these sentiments oftentimes begin to surface more, which is part of the resistance, right? We know these changes don't happen easily, and we know these changes don't have to happen swiftly. And so what we encourage our client partners to think about is you give people time to get on board. And part of that process of getting on board is training. It's putting in the policies, it's putting in the practices, it's updating your organizational mission, your value statements to really explicitly say and show that equity, that racial equity, inclusion, diversity is important and central to what we do. And that we are going to make changes in this organization in order for us to live that out in practice. And if you were going to have time to get on board, and if you don't, then decisions have to be made about whether those employees belong within an institution that has to practice equity, that has to practice fairness. And so those are the recommendations, some of the recommendations that we make. That is, you have to train staff, right? Like that is baseline. Training needs to be provided on staff so that when we talk about equity, when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about fairness, we all know what we're talking about. We're all on the same page. We're building this shared language and analysis together. And these are the changes that are going to happen. And that this needs to be done organization-wide, right? It can't be done in a way that's siloed, in a way that doesn't touch across the organization, so that, at some point, no one can say that this was not important to FJD. And then you can hold people accountable. Certainly when you have explicit examples of racism and discrimination, those need to be handled immediately, right? Because that sets the tone, right? And so we talked about in the report, we have Judge Simmons here, right? The example, the experience that Judge Simmons had, like that issue not being taken seriously, right? That sets a tone for the organization, and that employees can perceive that issues of racism and exclusion are not going to be taken seriously. As we saw in the report, right, that we had several questions around if something happens at FJD, specifically if a racist incident happens or a experience of discrimination happens, do you trust that FJD would do the right thing? And both judges and staff said, for the most part, they said no.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm going to concede my time, but again, I just want to state for the record that it's really a sad missed opportunity for the leadership team over at FJD to not participate in this hearing that can add some context and as relates to the response just to this report. I think for the president judge to not personally participate, I come from the area that leaders lead, regardless of how controversial the issue may be, we lead. And to not show up or not even send a representative, is very glaring as it relates to her attitude, her team's attitude as it relates to the issue of race and institutional racism in the First Judicial District. And really it's totally unacceptable to the African American people here in the city of Philadelphia. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to concede my time.
Member Johnson, you can delay, but you cannot deny. They have to come here for their budget, correct? You're going to get to
Absolutely.
You get to ask these questions later. It's better to do it now and get it out of the way, and hard feelings and corrective actions start, than to kick the can down the road. And I know how you are, Member Johnson, and you have a long memory, and so I hope that I hope they're watching. I hope that we can get to a table to discuss some of these critical issues and do so in a collegial way. And if not, it's going to happen. So we might as well do it. Thank you, Member Johnson. Chair recognizes Member Gim. Member Gim, are you there?
I am. I was wondering if Councilmember Green was right before me.
Is that so, Member Green?
Thank you, Councilmember Gim.
Chair recognizes Member. All right.
Thank you, Councilmember Jones. I know navigating these teams calls are very challenging and a lot of different things, but I appreciate that. I just want to. I do have some questions for Ms. Lubin, but in the microphone check before we started the hearing, I made a statement saying I received a letter from the government the other day. I opened and read it, and I didn't mean government. I meant the First Judicial District. I think some people know the rest of that line, where that comes from. But I too, like Councilmember Johnson, have a very long memory. I don't have much hair. I'm not always accurate. Sometimes I make errors, and I try to correct them when I can. But as a member of the bar, and the fact that this body sent a request to the First Judicial District to attend this hearing, and just like they are a co-equal branch of government, we also have the ability to do subpoenas. Generally, we don't do that unless we need to. And generally, the court does not do that unless they absolutely need to. So I just find it interesting that if we were in a court and if a judge asked someone, a member of the bar or witness, to come to chambers for a proceeding, they would, out of courtesy, be inclined to do that without having to do an actual subpoena. But if someone fails to show and fails to acknowledge that request, then a subpoena occurs. I just find it very interesting that a co-equal branch of the government that was knowledgeable about this issue and this concern would not appear. One, I thought they were going to appear by Mr. McSorley providing testimony because Judge Fox could not be here. But then Mr. McSorley is not here, and a letter was sent in lieu of his appearance. That's not how a co-equal branch of government works with another party. I'm somewhat dismayed, and I will reserve some of my comments, which I did have in last year's budget hearing, and I will have even more so in this year's budget hearing in reference to the process of appropriating dollars and how we do that with co-equal branches of government. And I just find it very interesting that they would not appear here and would send a letter. And I think in the letter that I received, it stated that they just recently went through a reorganization process and that it was too early for those to come, although this is an issue they've been working on for some time and actually retained Ms. Lubin's organization. So I just find it baffling that they would not be here to testify or at least listen to the issues that have been raised and have not been addressed. So in that regard, I just have a few questions for Ms. Lubin. My understanding is that you tried to reach out to the First Judicial District after you were retained, and you then had a period of time where communication did not occur. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And that was based on your interest to have them to follow up on certain things that you had raised in your report in reference to next steps that they would take going forward?
Yeah, so this was specifically after we delivered the report. We had conversations with both Judge Fox and Judge Allen, and at the time they had agreed that they would share the report, or at least the executive summary of the report. And we were told that the governing board would make the final decision and how the report would be shared. And so that was in September. Our last meeting with Judge Fox and Judge Allen was in September of last year. We went over a training plan. And that was part of our contract, was to begin to deliver some trainings to the judges and leadership at the court. And so in that meeting in September, both judges made some requests to us to update or revise the training plan. We submitted that in October and didn't hear anything after that. We made several attempts to get in contact with the judges, and we were getting concerned because the trainings were supposed to start in January of this year, and we didn't hear anything at all. And so at that point, or several months later, at the beginning of February, we then decided as the CURE team to request the termination of our contract because we were not able to fulfill the obligations of the contract without any communication from FJD.
Now, were you compensated for putting together, I'm assuming you were compensated for the report, correct?
Yes.
And were you also compensated for the other work that you were doing after the report was delivered in reference to the meetings, the training plan that was put together? Were you compensated for that?
We were not.
You were not. Okay. But you were still under contract.
Yes.
With a body of law-trained individuals.
Member Green, are you there? He seems to be having technical difficulties. We will allow him to join after. Member Gim, would you like to ask your questions now?
Sure. Thank you. And I'm sorry that we lost Member Green, although I know he'll be back soon, and we'll be happy to make a break for him to conclude his remarks. First of all, I want to thank our wonderful chair for Legislative Oversight for hosting this, and of course to the resolution sponsor, Councilmember Johnson, who has been really diligent on this whole issue. I want to take a moment and just acknowledge the presence of Judge Karen Simmons, without whom the dreadful attacks and harassment that she endured and her appeal to her colleagues. This report may not have been released because I think it's clear that had a profound impact. And I think that that's an important aspect of what we're talking about here. This is not, this is about the care and keeping of colleagues, about the care and keeping of our broader public, and about the care and keeping of a mission towards justice. I especially want to thank the work of Dr. Lubin and Cure for engaging so deeply on this report. And I had just a few questions for you. I think what was interesting was to see the difference between 2018 to February 2020. In 2018, when Cure was initially commissioned to take a look at structural and institutional barriers at the courts, I think that there was some hope and inclination that what would have been written about would have been received with, the understanding, as was said before, that this is, an examination, and some of the things that come to light are challenging and difficult, but they require us to face them responsibly and to figure out plans of action. So I have a couple of questions, and I know that Member Green's back, but Dr. Lubin, do you have some insight about how the change happened between when you were initially commissioned to February of 2020, when so many communications broke off that it became a dysfunctional, or not a working relationship? And was wondering if you could share a little bit of that.
Sure. Thank you so much, Councilwoman, for your question. My understanding is, and this is just our perception from externally, is that for the most part during the terms of our engagement, we had a pretty good working relationship with Judge Fox and Judge Allen, who were spearheading, or who were our key contacts at FJD. And I don't know if it was something that happened at the governing board meeting in which they decided to not share the report, but we just heard nothing after that meeting that we had with them in September. And so I fortunately don't have much insight in terms of what may have broken down after we met with them in September.
And that was September 2019.
2019, yes.
One of the things that I also appreciate very much about your report is your compassion and care and keeping in terms of recommendations for Black women in particular who are at the courts. Affinity groups and support networks, I think, are so key and important. And I think, again, recognizing that the experiences that we've heard from not only Black female judges, but Black female lawyers who come before the courts, Black women who come through family courts or through landlord-tenant courts and others, they echo the experiences that if we struggle to treat colleagues equally, those who come before the courts also struggle for an equal vision of justice. And I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit more about, as was said, we don't have the courts here. Are there recommendations that any external body or a higher body to FJD could require to enforce your recommendations?
Yeah, good question. And I don't know, who that higher body would be. I think it might be the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. Certainly, we've heard this afternoon in the hearing that there are different ways to enforce accountability. Budget is certainly one way that it can be done. That this can be done in a number of different ways. I think certainly the council has oversight. We believe in community power at CURE, and so I think ways in which the community can think about how they can come together and require a response from FJD as a government entity, as an agency that is responsible for the administration of justice when issues of equity and unfairness, whether that be related to internal operational practices or in the direct administration of justice in terms of how cases are decided. There needs to be transparency. There needs to be accountability, and that needs to be an open and ongoing process. And so I would encourage folks in the community to think about ways in which they can hold FJD accountable.
And my last question is around, I'm looking through the recommendations that you had from the 2019 report, but you know, a number of the things that we often deal with are situations of when someone experiences harassment and there's a complaint that's lodged. Do you have a recommendation about the best practices for courts like the FJD to figure out the process for lodging a complaint about harassment? Who do staff go to? How are the complaints tracked, audited, reviewed, and then followed through on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we mentioned in the report that process was a bit fuzzy, and that so what we find when we do these types of assessments is that even if there is a clear written process, trust is really important, right? Such that staff may know that there is a process, but if we don't trust the process, then people won't even engage with it, right? And so we noted that there were a couple of, we heard this in the, certainly the survey, the questions that were around like the grievance process, people didn't believe, you know, in the grievance process. And then when we asked people in the qualitative methods like the focus groups, you know, people said that they just wouldn't bother because they didn't think that their complaints or grievances would be taken seriously. And so part of it is culture, right? That you can have policies and practices written down, but if the culture doesn't support the practice, then people won't trust the practice or the policy, right? And so there are things that can be done to begin to create this culture where people feel that their complaints or their grievances will actually be heard. One of the things that it sounds really small and simple that we suggested is a grievance box, some way for people to provide anonymous complaints and a way for which leadership at FJD to address them, right? So people see and hear that something is being done. Sometimes some organizations do this on a monthly basis in which they're really public, at least internally, that we received all of these lists of questions or complaints or grievances, and there's a way in which they respond to those questions either through, you know, a common place where some people use Teams or whatever the tool is internally that people know to go to for centralized information, or it's something that's sent out via email, but that you're beginning to create this culture of transparency and two-way communication, which is really important. And we didn't really get a sense of that at FJD, that everything is pretty top-down organizationally. And when you have that type of system, that stifles the voices of employees, particularly those who may be experiencing racism and marginalization.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lubin, for giving us your expertise and the level of analysis and compassion that you bring to this very important issue. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Member Green, you're back.
Yes, I'm not sure. Maybe some people didn't like the questions I was asking, but I'm not going to allow that to stop me from being, at times, the angriest member of City Council. That's a shout out to my fellow barrister and lawyer, Michael Cord. But Dr. Lubin, I just wanted to just ask a few more questions. And I hope you don't take the tenor of my questions being directed at you. It's based on a level of frustration that I'm seeing based on what I'm hearing and based on what I read prior to this hearing. And so before I was stopped by communication means, my understanding is that you were in communication with First Judicial District, and it's interesting you said a top-down type of dynamic within the organization. So your contract was terminated by you as one of the parties to the contract, and that was based on the fact that you would try to continue to communicate based on the nature of the contract to complete the work, but not heard back from the First Judicial District. When was the last payment you received from FJD?
Off of the top of my head, it was probably around June, July of last year.
June, July of last year. So then you submitted your report, I believe you said in September. Was that the time period?
The report was submitted around June and July.
Oh, June, July. Okay, so it sounds like you may have been paid through the time of you completing the report. Is that correct?
Correct.
And
Yes.
then you incurred additional work product in reference to that transition document, other engagement that you incurred, but you invoiced but have not been paid for, correct?
So we didn't invoice because we were waiting for, the invoice was contingent on approval from FJD, and so we never received approval to move forward.
Okay, but then you did incur time and expenses in reference to that transition and the other document that you provided to the FJD, but never received a response. But that was clearly within the scope of your contract.
That's it. That's right.
Right. Okay. And then once again, how did you initially come into a contractual relationship with FJD?
There was an RFP that was put out, a request for proposals that we responded to.
Okay, and in that scope of that RFP, it was not only for this report, but also some of those other transition work that you talked about?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
So in that scope of work requested through that request for proposals, was that just for the report or for some additional work beyond the report?
Yes, so the scope of the contract was for training to happen after the report. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so obviously, well, I'm just based on the facts I'm hearing that there was a request of a report in an RFP and also a request for training, but then when you tried to provide that training following up from the report, you never received a response in reference to the training that you're suggesting based on the report.
Yes. So we met with Judge Fox and Judge Allen after we delivered the report. We talked through strategies for how to share the findings of the report. And in those conversations, they were on board with sharing the report. And then we had a follow-up conversation, a follow-up meeting, in-person meeting in which this was at the end of a working group meeting. We met with Judge Fox and Judge Allen and talked about the training plan that we had submitted for their review. And in that meeting, they asked for some updates to that training plan. We submitted that updated training plan a few weeks later. And at that point, the communication stopped from FJD.
Okay. So based on that back and forth, in this colloquy, Judge Allen and Judge Fox were working with you on the training and the outcome of the report, but then their communication with you ceased.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, I just find it interesting that an entity that would request for proposals and to address training, obviously, as an organization, they saw a need, reached out to various entities like CURE to provide an assessment and also ways to improve upon that need. They then decided to not go any further. And even though Judge Fox and Judge Allen suggested the report should be shared, they as an organization decided not to share that information and decided not to move forward with the exact training that they requested through their RFP and did not finalize or continue on the contract in which they contracted with you for. So based on my assessment, unless there's other information, in fact, I'm not aware, clearly the First Judicial District is not interested in moving forward in training to address the issues for the very thing that they saw as a problem and why they asked for an RFP and retain your services. You don't need to respond to that. I'm just saying based on the facts that have been provided at this time, and I think it's very illuminating that they would also not be here, as I stated in the beginning of my questions, to answer some of these questions and concerns that have been raised, not only by this report, not only by the facts that led to the report in reference to the treatment of women of color, in particular African American jurors within the First Judicial District, and then outside of just those issues in itself, just would not provide the courtesy to a equal branch of government that also has the responsibility of appropriating dollars. Dr. Lubin, you talked about accountability. There's accountability in a whole range of perspectives, not only as elected officials, we're held accountable, and judges are also held accountable as well, not just in appropriation, but also retention and other matters. With that, thank you, Councilmember Jones, for the opportunity to come back in spite of my technical difficulties. I look forward to engage in this conversation again during the budget process.
I can count on it, Member Green. I can count on it. Chair recognizes Member Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you, and thank you for convening this conversation today. Also, thank you to the sponsor again of this legislation, Councilmember Johnson, and thank you to you, Doctor. This report is amazing. I have so many questions, but I think if I dive into all of them, my colleagues will probably end up missing dinner. So I'm going to try to be as brief as possible in the midst of some of my questions. Again, to those in the listening public, I highly recommend that people check this report out because it's definitely public information. It's something that anyone can have access to. In the midst of looking at your report, just want to start with some numbers. There's the number 670. That is the total number of staff that you were essentially able to communicate with. Does that include where you talked about the breakdown of administrators, judges, and all those folks, or is that on top of? So are we looking at 670 staff or more like 745 staff?
Mm-hmm. So that's 670 is the total number of staff that participated in the survey. There was an additional 45, but we didn't. Judges that completed a separate survey that had pretty much the same questions, but we separated that data analysis out so that we can clearly distinguish between the responses from the judges and for FJD staff.
Okay, so we're looking at about 715 total participants. Yes. Okay, so just out of curiosity, because I think I'm going to keep that same energy of Councilmember Green and Councilmember Gim and other folks before me. From a fiscal perspective, do we know how many people work there? If we're looking at 670 people who actually replied, how many, just approximately how many staff? We know that they have a budget that's well over $100 million. So how many folks are we talking about that basically did not participate?
So at the time that we were working with FJD, we were told that there were about 2,400 employees.
Okay. So, okay. All right. That's extremely helpful. So out of 2,400, you were able to talk to about 700, which is less than a third. I'm wondering, out of those 2,400, it seems like the majority of the people who participated in the survey were actually identified as female. I'm wondering, based on your knowledge of the demographics there, is that reflective of the people who are employed there? Are we looking at establishment in a place that's majority female employees?
I don't have that data immediately available to me. I would just be, some of the judges, Judge Simmons, who were here, may be able to respond. I believe that we had higher percentages of female employees at FJD, but I don't have that data immediately available.
So for the record, I just want to make sure that we're being very clear. Like, for the record, we're given the perception that this is an establishment that has a significant number of females employed there. And I just want to be clear that we have a significant number of females who responded to the survey, and that's not necessarily reflective of the hiring practices of the institution. In all reality, there's a chance that they may not have a significant number of females employed over there. Is that correct?
There is a possibility, just because I don't have the data available.
Okay, thank you. Now, Councilmember Green kind of touched on this, but I would like you to do a deeper dive. There are folks like me who weren't on council before and who might not know everything that you're talking about as it relates to some of the things that's been discussed. So when you say Judge Fox and Judge Allen requested funds for training, and that training didn't happen and those dollars didn't get spent, can you go a little more in depth. Pretend that I wasn't there when that original conversation took place. And can you explain to us what you're talking about and what Councilmember Green was referring to with the funds and what didn't get spent and what didn't happen based on recommendations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I do, unfortunately, will have to leave shortly. We're in the middle of a training for City of Dallas, and so I hopped on just to
That'll be my last question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
To be with you all. So yes, so we were told that there wasn't funds to move forward with. So let me backtrack. That we were told there weren't funds to hire this inclusion equity staff person that was part of our contract as well, was to help hiring with that. We were told that because of the computer virus, I believe that happened last year, that contributed to their not being able to have the funds available to support the hiring for that position. In regards to the training, as I mentioned, we went several months without hearing anything from FJD on the training. We weren't told when we were having those conversations about the training that there was a budget issue. It wasn't until February of this year, after I sent the letter requesting that our contract be terminated for because of non-communication from FJD, that we then received a letter from FJD saying that the contract was terminated for budget reasons. And the implication there was that, because what was left in the contract was the training, that there was no budget available to support them moving forward with the training.
Thank you for the clarity, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Member Thomas. Before you go, thank you. Sometimes when you are the physician, you get to make the diagnosis, but you don't get to perform the surgery. But the diagnosis is important to save the life of the patient. So on behalf of the City of Philadelphia, thank you for not just going in for a paycheck and telling people what they want to hear, but telling them the hard truths. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We really believe in this work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Williams? Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. Who are the next group to testify?
Thank you.
The next witness to testify is Nefertiri Sickout.
Are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I hear somebody else. Who's that?
my husband is about to get her shortly. Sorry.
In a COVID world, do not apologize.
Thank you for understanding.
All right. Can you state your name for the record and please begin your testimony?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Jones and members of the Legislative Oversight Committee. My name is Nefertiri Sickout, Acting Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer in the Mayor's Office. I am here to offer testimony on Resolution number 200485, which authorizes hearings to examine the findings of racism, nepotism, and mistrust within the First Judicial District, as revealed in a recent report by the Center for Urban and Racial Equity. Achieving a workforce that is diverse, inclusive, and equitable means that an organization's workforce reflects the diversity of the communities that it serves, and that this diverse representation not only exists across the breadth of functions in the organization, but also throughout the hierarchy of leadership positions within the organization. The Equity Organizational Assessment Report of FJD highlights some progress towards workforce equity, but also demonstrates that much work remains to be done. This finding is not unique to FJD, as organizational barriers toward workforce equity are generally systemic and longstanding. These barriers are related to diverse recruitment and hiring processes, cultural norms regarding belonging and inclusiveness at the workplace, professional development, and opportunity for promotional advancement within the workplace. One of the first steps, and I mean the initial steps towards advancing a more equitable workforce at the First Judicial District has been completed, which is the report's rigorous data analysis. By having a better understanding of the data, more intentional strategies can be developed to target specific challenges, including challenges related to the report's findings of a culture of nepotism, mistrust, and racial tension. To achieve true change on challenges identified in the report, more intentional efforts must be made to remove institutional barriers that impede workforce equity. Only through a systematic foundational approach will we achieve real advancement in terms of greater representation of and participation by employees of color and other historically marginalized and underrepresented groups at the First Judicial District. We are working on the same efforts within our municipal workforce at the city. For example, all departments reporting to the mayor are completing an annual plan on how to advance a more diverse and inclusive workforce and department culture so that we can build on progress already made and improve in those areas where challenges persist. The administration appreciates the sponsors and committee examining this critical issue. We welcome any opportunity to partner with the FJD as they work toward achieving equity within the workplace. I am happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions for this witness?
I have one quick one, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes Member Johnson.
Nefertira, just one real quick statement. Thank you for your testimony. We want to follow up with you regarding a plan of action and recommendations as it relates to this particular issue from FJD, similar to how you just talked about. There are other city departments that are required to provide that information to your office. And so we'll follow up with you to have the same type of requirement. And also, if you could talk to the mayor and your team regarding making this a part of his budget priorities and connecting the two. And so with a budget should come reforms as it relates to this particular issue. So we're not just having a hearing for the simple fact of having a hearing, but really focusing on outcomes. And being the chief diversity officer, I would think that would be within your purview with the backing and the support of the mayor, which is why I'm sure you're here today. And so thank you very much for your testimony.
Yes, I appreciate that, and please do follow up. I'd love to partner with you and provide any support, also to support to the First Judicial District. I'm an attorney, just like Councilmember Green and a number of you, and I'll just say, we have been very fortunate in the mayor's office to start creating a more intentional space to advance diversity, inclusiveness, and equity in the city. In addition to all departments working on a plan as to how they build a more diverse and equitable workforce and department culture, all departments are also going to complete a racial equity assessment and a racial equity action plan. We're phasing it in through 3 cohorts over the next 3 fiscal years. And we have a lot more intentional work focused on budget equity, procurement equity, community engagement, and high priority services. And so there's a lot of work moving on this side. Very happy to share it, at the appropriate time. And please feel free to follow up with me.
Member Johnson. So
thank you very much. And we definitely will follow up.
I want to welcome you to city government, and I want to give you your first charge from me. I'd love to examine the triplex contract for cleaning. That was a $17 million contract that was taken from a female minority firm from Philly and was given to a company out of Chicago. It comes back up in June. And so that's going to be my flagship. So I'm going to give it to you to look into.
Yep, I'll follow up.
All right. Thank you so very much.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Williams?
Mr. Chair, before you move on, this is
Yes.
Councilmember Thomas.
Member Thompson? Thomas?
Thomas, yep. I just wanted to jump in real quick and say congratulations and thank you. And my office will definitely be reaching out to you about the work. But I did want to echo the sentiments of my colleagues, both Councilmember Jones and Johnson, as it relates to the work with the First Judicial District being something that's substantive. And also Councilmember Jones and his advocacy for that contract. I do think that that's an important initiative, an important contract, and an important statement from us in the city of Philadelphia. So thank you, colleagues, for your leadership. And I just wanted to echo my support for both statements that was communicated.
So sincerely welcome on board, though.
I've been here for a little while. I joined the mayor's office in 2016, August of 2016, but serving in an acting role since our former Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer retired in May, Nolan Atkinson.
He was a good man.
Yes, definitely.
All right.
I have an interview at 4 p.m. If you don't mind, I will drop off if that's okay.
That's all right. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, everyone.
Ms. Williams, who's next to testify?
Our next two witnesses will be Judge Roxanne Covington and Judge Karen Simmons.
You made them wait.
That was not my choice, sir.
Okay.
I did not put the panels together. I'm just the clerk.
I sincerely apologize, Your Honor.
Hey, point of information, Mr. Chairman.
Member Johnson, I'm recognizing.
And Mr. Chairman, in all seriousness, right, and why this issue is so serious, right, is because these two sisters who have taken time out of their schedule to be here are courageous, right? And they're also setting the path to break barriers of racism for the next young Samantha Williams, right, who decides to go in that path. And so we want to thank Judge Simmons and thank Judge Covington for stepping up to the plate. We know Black women lead, Black women lead, Black women lead, but we thank you for being here today as you begin your testimony. But we're paving the way to make sure we break down the institutional barriers of racism, so when young ladies like Samantha Williams follow your footsteps, she doesn't have to deal with the same type of discrimination and nonsense, right, that you are addressing. I just state that for the record.
Thank you, Member Johnson, for your commentary. I don't know which one of you would like to go first, but okay. See, now two judges, I'm not going to do that. So I'm gonna allow you guys to decide, but please state your name and begin your testimony.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Judge Karen Simmons, and I've been a judge for the last 15 years. I want to thank you, Chairman Jones, so much for holding these hearings. I want to thank all of the members of this committee that's present today, but a very special thank you to you, Councilman Johnson, for always being there and not letting this issue die and go to the wayside. I want to thank you for this invitation and opportunity to address you on these urgent issues of race, discrimination, and equity found in the Cures Equity Assessment Report. I'm here because these issues continue to negatively impact the citizens of Philadelphia generally and the Philadelphia court system, as well as myself most specifically. My goal is a lofty one, and that is to end the institutionalized racism within our court system. As a little background, back in the spring of 2018, I went to my court leadership in municipal court with some specific issues about race, discrimination, and equity. And I made it clear. I even called for a meeting with her, then President Judge Marsha Nafil, and all the Black judges that were interested in coming on my court to address specific issues of racism and discrimination that were occurring. And I made it clear that when it hit the fan, us Black judges would not and could not sit back and be quiet, but that something needed to happen. I also spoke then to a couple of members of the AGB that I trusted and had a relationship with, and talked to them about some of those same issues. And as a result, that's how we got part of the contract for the Cure report. I want to say that while America is purportedly attempting to have yet another reckoning with its longstanding racial inequities towards Black Americans, our court system remained mirrored in the disease of racism. Throughout the country, courts have issued strong proclamations denouncing systemic racism, and particularly racism within the judicial system. Our courts have remained deafeningly silent. Many courts have issued sweeping statements acknowledging racism and its stain on the judicial system. For example, the Washington Supreme Court stated, "The devaluation and degradation of Black lives is a persistent and systemic injustice. We continue to see racialized policing and the overrepresentation of Black Americans in every stage of our criminal and juvenile justice systems. Our institutions remain affected by the vestiges of slavery, Jim Crow laws that were never dismantled, and racist court decisions that were never disavowed. And through it all, I must say, everyone here meaning our court system, have remained and still is to this day silent. The issues of race, anti-racism, discrimination, and equity in our courts demands an urgent response and plan that should be addressed immediately and communicated to the whole court system and throughout our citizens of Philadelphia. There are questions that must be asked and answered of our court leadership because our system of justice demands it. The level of disrespect and retaliation I personally have experienced since December of 2018 by members of our court and even members of specifically of the AGB, because I continue to speak out about the systemic racism within our court and continue to be directed towards me, is a disgrace, and it must stop. I want to believe the reason you don't have more judges here today, such as the representative of the National Bar Association Judicial Council, is because of fear of reprisal and not of indifference. Dr. King realized that silence is a form of complicity when he said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." This silence has persisted since I received that racist note in my robing room 2 years ago, and continues throughout the conversations to address the issues identified in Cure's report. We come here today and presented these same issues, myself and Mr. Michael Cord, to the members of the AGB. Number one was, why didn't the AGB immediately release the Cure report once it was concluded? This is a legitimate question that needs to be addressed and communicated to our court and to you, members of council. The inaction could make all of our judges potentially complicit because of this lack of action and a lack of transparency. Number two, I ask, and we ask, and I hope you all will ask, why the threat against me, in the words of the Cure report, was not taken seriously by the court leadership. In my words, it was dismissed and not addressed, which made it clear that the leadership at the time and its collective did not care. The disgusting, racist, hateful note left for me was an opportunity for our court to do better and to be better, and they failed miserably. They had the ability as leaders to send a strong and clear message that my life mattered and that this Black female judge mattered. We all knew the person who left the note is, and maybe still it was, and maybe still is, a member of our courts, because that's the only people with access to a robing room. I must have spoken to at least 50 or 60 Black and brown judges, employees, and people outside of the courts. And the real belief and perception is had the same type note been left for a Jewish person or a white woman, the AGB's response would have been vastly different. There would have been a strong, clear, and swift response. There has been a false narrative that there was no investigation by the AGB because it was the directive of the feds. I don't know who this mystical feds is, but this is not true. The U.S. Attorney and FBI only got involved because there was not a response or investigation by our court system. Immediately after I received that racist note, I asked the AGB, and I've continued to ask in writing and verbally, for a few things. Number one is an investigation and an update on an investigation that I know did not exist and does not exist. That cameras be placed in the hallways of the robing rooms, because then we could have seen who had gone into the robing room. Not inside the robing room, but in the hallway. And that fingerprinting of our court staff and employees exists because there was, in fact, a fingerprint able to be pulled off of the envelope of the note. None of my requests were met with any type of response. Very recently, and I mean within the last week, cameras are now present in the hallway of the robings room some 2 years later. The AGB's response to what happened to me is disgraceful and brings up many emotions. Number three is that the AGB should conduct an internal self-assessment of their board and of our judges. It should incorporate all of the recommendations outlined in the Cure report and include a facilitator to work with every judge and paid for by the AGB with our same tax dollars that was used to procure the Cure organization. This would enable us to honestly address these issues of racism and equity in our court system and to acknowledge openly and transparently that there are issues of systemic racism in our court system and in our society, and to begin to address them. There needs to be a work group or committee similar to what Dr. Lubin has already addressed, with substantive goals and a plan of action with strict deadlines to address each issue presented in the report. When Mr. Cord and I addressed the AGB a week ago today, we both volunteered to start this work, that we're willing to give up our time to start this work and to work together with a diverse group of others in a transparent manner to achieve real change. This would be a progressive step. We are committed to working to address these issues and create a First Judicial District that is representative and responsive to everyone. While the Cure report for some is shocking and disheartening, it's not a shock to us because we live it every day. It should be looked at as a first step to address the issues many of us experience. The Cure report must finally be taken seriously. Judicial transparency is a must. The report demonstrates that both perceived and actual racism exists within the FJD. The courts must stand as guardians against specific and institutionalized racism and not as aiders and abettors or neutral condoners of racial injustice. Fairness within the judicial system, regardless of race, is the essential pillar of justice. Where fairness because of race is lacking, justice cannot be fairly dispatched and the rule of law will no longer exist. Inaction will allow the cancer of racism to metastasize within the court system. It is imperative that the courts hear and respond affirmatively to this call of action for social and racial justice. This is the right thing to do, and it is very, very long overdue. And this body holds some of the purse strings to force it to happen. I must state that the makeup of the AGB membership has recently changed, but the majority of the membership has remained. I remain hopeful through this process. And I thank you for this invitation to address you and these most urgent and crucial issues, because it is time, as Representative Lewis said, that we get into some good trouble and some necessary trouble to bring about much needed change. Thank you all very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And I'm so very thankful that nothing physically happened to one of our judges. And that I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to let your colleagues speak before you answer, to give you a little time to think. If you could name 3 things that you want done by the First Judicial Court immediately, think and then tell us what they are for the record. Please state your name and begin your testimony. Thank you for your patience. Take yourself off mute.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. Good afternoon, Chairman Jones. I'm so glad to see you. For the record, this is my councilman. Other council members, Councilman Kenyatta Johnson, thank you as well. Thank you for extending the invitation. I'm honored to be able to speak before you. Unlike some of my colleagues, I will not turn down an invitation from Philadelphia City Council. I respect this organization, so I am here. And again, I am honored to testify before you. If you call, you understand this judge will appear. I am here primarily because I'm very concerned about the findings of the Cure report. Those findings affect not just the First Judicial District as an organization, but also the city as a whole, because people appear before this governing entity, and if it affects those of us in the position as judges, it also affects the people who appear before us. So if we as judges are not safe from the problems of racism, you know that those in front of that court are not either. That report and evaluation was done, and the findings were completed, and the report was not released until City Council pressured the courts for its release. And since its release, I can tell you that not only has nothing changed, but things have continued and gotten worse. In particular, for black female judges. As you know, judges in the performance of their duties, people are not always happy with the decisions that we make. And there are occasions where we receive threats on our lives. And I, like many judges, have received such threats. Since the release of this Cure report, I was the subject of a death threat. And in the process of receiving that death threat, I went through the normal course of action with the FJD in requesting protection and security for myself upon receiving a death threat. And I am here to inform City Council that it took over a week for me to have any protection and security while under threat of my life and well-being from the First Judicial District. Now, aside from not having security and protection, what angered me even more so during this time of Black Lives Matter was that I was informed by the governing district of First Judicial District that our hands are tied and there is nothing we can do about it. But during this same period, there were white female judges who had protection and security. So that in itself is an example of how there are still differences in the way that we are treated as Black people within a judicial system. The findings in this report are clear. There have been no changes. There has been nothing done to address that which has been brought to the attention of the board. They are aware of it, and they are doing nothing about it. The mere fact that they have failed to acknowledge and address these systemic inequities that have persisted within this court system for decades is sending a clear and convincing message that this type of behavior is not only acceptable, but welcome and supported and condoned by our court system. Based upon that, at best, we as Black female judges, and really those that appear before this system, know that we are unwelcome and ill-supported, and at worst, in my case, targeted and not safe. Until something is done to address these problems, and it must be more than sending out a statement or holding training sessions to talk about it. They will move on with business as usual without making meaningful changes that are acceptable. I commend counsel for holding these hearings. The first step is to open the wounds and the sores. But some type of surgery must be done on this system. The fact that no one is here and participating in these hearings, other than those who have been victimized by this system, is a clear and shining example of the problem. The other aspect of it that must be addressed is the nepotism within this court system. Nepotism in and of itself is the core of this systemic racism. Because if you are not part of the dominant class, then you are in no position to hire and promote your friends and family. Hence, a vicious cycle of maintaining the status quo, of benefiting from this majority, will be never mending. So, this is going to be an overwhelming problem to solve. But as an African proverb said, how do you eat an elephant? And once again, you start with one spoon at a time. And I thank you and congratulate you for starting. I do want you to be aware that Judge Simmons and I are not the only judges at the FJD who are willing to participate and do the work, even though we're the only two who are here to testify. There are many others who are Black and non-Black that are willing to step up and help.
Absolutely.
So we're here to speak, but there are others who are not here, but are very willing to participate in the process. But we thank you for allowing us at least an opportunity to be heard.
One of the most profound things you said, that if our judges are not safe, then how can the district attorney, defense attorney, the victims, the accused, the witnesses, how can anybody truly be safe if you guys who are in charge of the process are not safe? So that is a concern. Let me ask a question before I turn it over to the sponsor of this resolution. Is there an official process when a judge or a member of your staff is threatened, that there is a known process by which you can register that and a series of either protective actions ensues?
After the incident with me, I was initially informed that there was no process in place previously. However, I have been on this bench for 10 years, and I am well aware that there have always been processes in place, always. And I refuse to believe that prior to 2020, there was no process in place. I am very sure there has always been a process in place for the protection of judges. I have been informed, and recently we were all provided a new process in place, a new process that has been put in place for the protection of judges upon receiving a threat. So there is now allegedly a new process in place. However, I find it simply incredible and unbelievable that for the last, 30, 40 years, however many years you all have had judges on the bench. I've been a judge for over a decade, and I find it simply unrealistic, wholly incredible that no process was in place whatsoever prior to the issue with me.
And if I can jump in, that clearly there's always been a process. And Judge Covington, it does just boggles one's mind to even think that that's what was said to you, because I've been on the bench since 2005. And prior to that, I was chief legal counsel for the police department for a good decade before that under police commissioners Johnson and Timoney. And the process was clearly outlined. And it was a joint process that included dignitary protection with the Philadelphia Police Department, as well as with the Sheriff's Department.
And I know there was some kind of process in place for judges who did not look like me, who had absolutely no issue getting security, dignitary protection in place at the same time.
Councilman
So that may be another budget hearing.
And Councilman Jones, did you want me to wait to answer your question, your three questions?
Yeah, I want to give
Okay.
my member Johnson an opportunity to weigh in on this. But before you both leave, I want to get the three priorities we should have to ask for and from the First Judicial District. Member Johnson, are you available?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes Member Johnson.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I want to, again, just echo what I talked about earlier on by commending Judge Covington and Judge Simmons for really taking a courageous approach in addressing this issue, speaking truth to power, not thinking about your own personal professional well-being. I'll put it that way. I thank you for speaking the truth to power around this issue and really fighting a system that has been embedded in our country and something we have been dealing with as African Americans for the last 400 years. And so we know this isn't an easy fight. And so I want you to do this for me, Judge Simmons. Just take us as a committee back and give us an overview of the day that you came to work, what it was like when you got up that morning and arrived to serve the people here in this great city of Philadelphia, and what took place when you arrived in your chamber.
I'm gonna do my best to get through it. For someone told me who really cares about me that the fact that I still get emotional and my response to this means that I haven't fully dealt with all the issues that come up as a result of it. I had the audacity to run for president judge of municipal court. That's where it all started. because I truly believed and know, and I still know, that I was the most qualified, I had the most experience, and I had some very novel ideas of how we could run. I would run that court and make sure we were not addressing issues today about race, discrimination, and equity. And that truly the most qualified, the most educated, the most experienced person would get the job when we talk about staff, when we talk about employees, actually when we even talk about other leadership on the court. And I was one who voiced it because I never wanted anyone to say we didn't know that's what Judge Simmons thought or this was her position, because you get what you see with me. I'm going to call it like it is, and I don't believe in trying to get somewhere and then surprise everybody. And so, and as I stated, I'd already made had the conversation with a group of our Black judges on municipal court, with our court leadership, as well as a number of the judges on the AGB, about trying to do something to address the racism and the specific acts that we had observed or had been brought to my attention on municipal court. So on that morning, which happened to have been the week before the president judge election, and, just a little asterisk, I'd had so many of my colleagues commit to support me, or I never would have run for president and judge. And I know that's water under the bridge. As a result of that, I found out maybe the day before I received the note, 2 days before I received the note, that members of our court were getting calls from certain political leadership saying that Judge Simmons, she's a nice lady, but reminding them how they got on the bench and reminding them where they support to be. And anyone who knows me, the first thing, I do think I'm nice, but that is not a phrase where most people would use to describe me as a nice lady. They may describe me as a lot of things, but that wouldn't be the first thing to come to mind. And so on this day, I was in courtroom 703, which I'll never forget. And 703 happens to have been a courtroom that started at 8:30. And so as a result of that, I was in my chambers somewhere between 7:30 and 8. And then I walked up the back elevator, as I always do when I'm in an 8:30 room or any room, with my judicial aide so that we could get the court date started. We went I put on my robe. I walked after that, court opened from 8:30. And because I'm one who I think, I'm not in a rush, I'm just wanting to get it right. I had been on the bench, which was supposed to be an early date because one of my colleagues was coming in for a 1 o'clock list to handle his post trials. Well, in my normal fashion, I was still on the bench at 1 o'clock. And I had not gotten off the bench from the time I sat there at 8:30 until the time that my day ended, which was closer to around 2 or 2:30. And what I recall is that I got off the bench once the day was over. Me and my staff were told by the judge's tip staff, as we call them, that we were leaving, and we were almost to the back elevator, but said, this has your name on it. So she gave this envelope, which was an inter-office envelope, to my judicial aide. And my judicial aide at the time was Naja Davis. She took the envelope and didn't think anything of it because inter-office mail is frequently left in a judge's robing room because you could either do that or go up to chambers. As we look back, both of us took note that there was nobody that was unusual or that we wouldn't have anticipated that walked through my courtroom to the back area. But there is a back elevator that you can get to the robing room. And there's also another courtroom that's next door that would share that same hallway. And it wasn't until, we took the elevator up to the 13th floor, got in chambers, and opened my secretary opened the inner office mail. And then I heard her gasp, and she handed me the note. And when I read it, I just couldn't believe it. I mean, not that I thought I was special or these type things would happen to me, but I didn't think these type things would happen to me. I did think that in December of 2018, while you don't have to vote for me, you don't have to like me, you don't have to respect me, but you do have to acknowledge that I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. but I didn't think anything like that could happen or would happen. But I must say that after getting that note, what happened afterwards, to me, was worse than what happened in the note, because the note was just one coward who thought that by sending that was going to stop me from being me. So they clearly didn't know anything about me. But and that had to be some weak person. But then what happened is that we're talking about this whole system, this whole justice system, and all the leadership, as we talk about from the top down, that took that and didn't do anything but send me a few well wishes and notes about how sorry they were individually about this happening to me.
And to date, there has not been from the FJD any official results of an investigation or an investigation separate from the feds, correct?
No, not at all. And it was more recently that I started hearing from my president, Judge Pat Dugan, and other members that there was nothing done because they were told not to get involved because the FBI was investigating it. And as I stated, the FBI, I came to learn, only investigated it because someone who cares about me knew someone and asked them to get involved, and other reasons as well. But they did it because they saw that nothing was being done within the courts to look into it, to investigate it, to do anything about it.
Now, let me ask you this as relates to staff members, right? Because also inside the CURE report, it talked about significantly how staff members basically feel like they're working in a hostile environment as relates to race relations, social equity, getting promoted, the issue of nepotism where, someone can come with no qualifications and bump right up in front of them regardless of how long they've been over there. When staff have issues, what's the process for reporting complaints? Who do they go to say this is the issue that I have? Just being in a work environment.
They can go to their supervisors, they can go to HR, human relations, but what's come to be known, which was one of the issues I brought out in the spring of 2018, was that a staff member did go and report some issues that she was having about race, about what she felt was someone attacking her in open court, saying some real rude, disrespectful things. Well, what the outcome was she was also disciplined because of her reaction to being called some type of animal or and a black bitch or something of that nature. But she ended up being disciplined. So that's what you see, or that's what publicly one see. I think that it's been so clear that many of the staff, they will find a person like myself, maybe like Judge Covington, or other judge that they trust, that they believe will speak up for them. And I've done that on more times than I can even mention, or kept track of, to try to speak up for them, to say something has to change. But they also see, as we talk about nepotism, that really don't get you far. I often use my ex-judicial tip staff as an example. And I know she's thankful, and I'm thankful that Judge Dugan promoted her and gave her a promotion. But the reality is Naja Davis has a master's degree, and Naja has probably more than 20 years experience, and she's the deputy to someone in court administration. She's his assistant who doesn't have nearly the education and maybe similar experience, and he's a nice person, but we have to call a thing a thing. When you're more qualified, when you're more experienced, when you're more educated, when you think out of the box, why are you not given the responsibility, the title, and the money to show, to actually show those things and make it public so others can see that you're hard working? When you're the most qualified, you actually get the position.
Yeah.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
Your Honor Covington, and this
Yes.
is my last comment. Just give us, and Chairman Jones started off the hearing talking about the safety of judges, and also we recognize that you're putting your lives on the line. right? You're making some decisions, some rulings that some will agree with and some very well don't. Take us to how your day unfolded that resulted in you getting a threat by someone and how it was addressed.
I mean, well, Councilman Johnson, it's sad to say this could be par for the course. It's in the line of work. Basically, I'm in my courtroom hearing cases. Like most judges, as Judge Simmons explained, our assistant, our secretary opens the mail because generally judges don't open their mail because you don't know what's contained therein. It may be ex parte communication. It may be something pertaining to a case that we don't need to see. We get a lot of mail from different places. So I have my secretary on alert for things that could be important, that could be worrisome. This actually was the second threat that I received. My secretary is very savvy. The first threat I received, as far as the investigation of this matter, they claimed they could not fully investigate it the first time because we touched the envelope in the paper and they couldn't pull fingerprints and other things. They basically blamed it on us. So this time, with COVID, my secretary was already wearing gloves and other things, but she made copies of it immediately and brought it downstairs and put it back. But she notified me immediately. And the nature of the threat was very frightening. I mean, when someone says, I'm going to find you, I'm going to rape you, I'm going to kill you. And threats were also made to my family members. So, my family, so when people are threatening you and people of your family, it's also concerning to me because I don't think I look like most judges, so I believe I'm very identifiable. Or at least the traditional judge in the courtroom. So, we followed what I knew to be the proper procedure, notifying the sheriffs in the building, who also notified the police district, notifying the supervisory chain through the court, and taking the investigation procedures. And at that point, I'm also awaiting my protective detail because I'm not leaving the courthouse without protective detail. So I went through all of that, and I'm, my secretary's being interviewed. I have to interrupt my court list, my business for the day, to handle interviews, but I'm still trying to do my court list, knowing now that someone is out to kill me. And I waited at court till 7 p.m. for my protective detail to be told that, oh, we don't have the manpower to give you detail. And I'm like, excuse me, I don't understand. So at this point, I'm very upset, to say the least. And I personally am probably more upset about not getting protective detail than I am about a death threat. And I had to go home that evening without protection. And I spent 7 days without any type of protective detail.
That's crazy. Totally unacceptable.
And, I was informed that, well, we can have your police district do drive-bys, to which I responded, well, you know what a drive-by is? You ever watch rap videos? You know what a drive-by is? I mean, it's just like police can drive by, somebody can drive by my house. And, I had to it took 7 days before I had a protective detail, and that protective detail ended at midnight every night, because apparently no one would come to shoot me after midnight, because I guess they're on the clock, the shooter or whatever, the person who's going to kill me. So that was disturbing to me as well. I had limited, what I would consider limited detail.
Okay, well, let me ask you this and I'll wrap up before
Councilman Johnson, important clarity. I'm sorry, this is Councilmember Thomas.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, Member Johnson.
I'm sorry, I'm listening. This is a lot. Did you say the sheriff's office told you that it wasn't, that there was no protective detail available? I'm sorry, I missed that part right there.
Yes. Yes, Councilman Thomas, how are you? Yes. Who asked the question?
It was Member Thomas.
Yes, Councilmember Thomas. Yes, the Sheriff's Department, and just for your clarification, I need you to be clear on the lack of duties of the Sheriff's Office at that time, at least with the court. They were not doing bring downs to the court. They were not doing sheriff sales. I don't want you to think that this was during a time frame when the riots or anything were occurring, so they were not on riot duty. Because I was trying to understand exactly what you were doing where there was a lack of manpower.
Member Thomas, are you done?
Thank you. Sorry, Councilmember Johnson. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I get it. I get it. We're all getting a little angry. So let's stay on point, though. Member Johnson, you were up.
Yep, I'm going to wrap up and relax my time, but I just want to ask one other question. Do you have, off the top of your head, the total number of African American judges in FJD?
I do not. I do not. I know that I could break it down for you on the municipal court, but I would think just roughly that there's approximately 1/3 of the judges are Black judges. On municipal court, it's about the same.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Councilman.
Thank you.
Chair, I relax my time.
All right. I just have one pushback, Judge Simmons. You said you don't have to be respected. You just need to be acknowledged. I'm going to push back on that. Yes, you do have to be respected. You have to be respected as a human being first, and a judge second. I mean, I remember when you were elected. I remember how hard you worked to become elected. And the people that empowered both of you did so with the hope that you would take their aspirations to the bench and represent their rendition of justice, and that somebody that they could look up to and respect, sit on the bench that, everybody's not going to like your decisions, but everybody must respect the fact that you're the judge of that courtroom. And then if they don't like that decision, there are legal processes by which they can appeal. But for you not to receive the protection that every citizen, everyone coming in and out of your courtroom deserves, but particularly because you're administering our system, if you're not allowed to do your jobs, then what do we have? I mean, really, so I'm going to push back gently on the fact that you don't need to be respected. You need to be acknowledged. You need to be both, not or, but and.
And I agree with you totally. So thank you for that pushback.
All right. Member Green, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair Jones, and to both Judges Simmons and Covington. I want to thank you for being here and expressing your sentiments and also expressing your experiences. I am just still dismayed that you would have to go through this as members of not only the bar, but members of the bench among your own colleagues and not being provided the due that you are truly have earned as judges in the city of Philadelphia. Is a true reflection, unfortunately, of where we currently are at this day and time. As you were talking, it made me think about the fact that, you know, it was so hard for us to get people of color, especially African Americans, and in particularly African American women on the bench. It wasn't that long ago when becoming a member of the bar in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania was a significant challenge. There was a picture requirement, and it was a committee led by then Professor Peter Leocoris before he became the head of the Temple Law School and then the president of Temple University, to help lead in an effort that, you know, prominent barristers like Carlson and others were part of, that removed the picture requirement. And then all of a sudden, after the picture requirement was removed from the application process to become a member of the bar, the increase of African Americans started to go up. I wonder why, because of that picture requirement. And so the same issues that we're dealing with back then, obviously we're still dealing with today. And it's a shame that you, as members not only of the bar, but of the bench, who've had distinguished careers as jurists, have had to go through these issues and not getting the full respect that you have earned and are due as individuals, as judges, and as professionals, and more importantly, as African American women in our city. So I just want to make that comment and thank you for the willingness to testify and give your own personal experiences on issues that were brought to bear, thanks to the leadership of Councilmember Johnson in reference to this hearing, and our chair, Councilmember Jones. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Member. I think Member Thomas, do I see? No, Member Gim, is that you?
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. I just, had a brief comments also, just to share, as women, the outrage that you had to experience with the level of hostility, the violence that is based in race, but also in gender, especially sexualized violence against you, is absolutely unacceptable that it was not dealt with in a serious manner. And I hope that you will consider all of us on council to be partners in making sure that things will change and that we can work together to figure out how to do that. If we can't do that necessarily, we should be working together and making sure that the broader community is engaged and active. I said this a little bit earlier, but this is as much about being colleagues and encouraging a level of engagement and diversity on our judiciary that brings a body of experiences and temperament and brilliance and insight into the issues that Philadelphians face when they come before our First Judicial District. And certainly, while I wouldn't equate what happened to you with what happens to others, but if there is indifference to what you experienced, Black lawyers who come before the judiciary, individuals, those who are seeking justice who come before family court and in front of landlord-tenant court and in front of our criminal courts, it is hard to ensure justice if fellow jurists on the court, if their concerns are not taken seriously. And when there's a level of violence, when there are threats, when there is a feeling of being excluded and not brought in, those things are taken very seriously. So I want to thank you again, as my colleagues have done, for testifying, for coming forward, and then for helping us figure out better solutions.
Thank you for having us. Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Member Gim. Member Thomas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't want to beat the dead horse. This is emotional just listening to this. And to be honest with you, I again appreciate Councilmember Johnson, because if this hearing doesn't exist, I don't know how we hear this narrative. I don't know how we find out all this data and all this information. And I appreciate your courage for putting yourself out there and putting yourself at risk. Is a very difficult ask, and I appreciate your leadership. Just one question, Judge Simmons, you talked a little bit earlier about stakeholders being silent throughout the course of some of the things that you experienced, and you also talked about the fact that maybe there should have been more support and folks should have been more vocal. I'm wondering, how can we support you and help improve that component of things moving forward? Again, I know for me, this has been very, very alarming. This is a lot of information, but I think we can try to find some space and places where we can work together to see more of a collaborative effort with the courts. Clearly, that would have to be a judge by judge situation. Some folks are definitely willing to work with us, while other folks won't even come to our hearings. But how can we at least address that gap? I mean, you really hit my heart when you talked about that issue, and I can only imagine what it feels like and what the perception that you're doing this by yourself. So what can we do to partner and collaborate and work together, not just with council, but other organizations across the city who can be a voice and and help with some of the advocacy efforts that's needed?
That's a great question, and I think it's a whole lot of moving parts, because I can remember when I first got the note, my husband, who worked at City Hall at the time, and my really good girlfriend on the bench, Judge Dumas, they were the ones who got the call and came over. And I think that the both of them probably went into frantic because they had never seen me, including my husband at the time. We had been married for almost 25 years, had never seen me respond that emotionally since he'd known me. And I know Judge Dumas hadn't. And I realized this because it hit at the core. And it hit at everything about me as a person, because one of the few things I know that I've done my very best at, it's not about I've not done my best at being a wife, at being a daughter, but it's other than being a mother, doing my best, is being a judge. Like, I knew that I've given everything of me to be fair, to know the law, and to do what's right, and that this is what I got for it. So for me, when I think about the partners, because it's my colleagues, some that look like me too, that have been completely quiet, but also the court leadership, I think it's that we talk a lot about implicit bias, but the reality is these are issues of explicit and overt biases and discrimination. And I think that when I think of counsel and other partners, it's number one, bringing attention to it and not trying to sweep it under the rug. I think it's a huge start, and it really speaks volumes. I think that hearing what many of you council people have addressed is that making sure that the folks that are in leadership, because they're in leadership of a court system that is supposed to be representative of us judges. And if you're not going to speak up and speak out and protect us and our issues, then one has to ask, why are you there? But I think that to hold them accountable when the tough questions at the budget hearings, and we all know, having been lawyer for a couple of police commissioners, if those questions aren't asked, then what happens next when it comes to those budget hearings? But also that the staff and employees and the defendants and complainants and litigators are all your constituents. And I worry that if this type thing can happen to me, if it can happen to Judge Covington, for God, what's happening to the folks that come in to access our court system and expect justice? So while I think the conversation is extremely important to be highlighted, I think there should be accountability and answers as to why the report was suppressed, and accountability for what happens next. Because if this happens in any other organization, it would be not just we didn't release it and now we released it, but there's consequences as to why it wasn't released and what are we going to do now? And to actually create some type of committee, group, something to say we have to work on these issues.
Again, I just really thank you members of City Council, for your efforts and the interest that you have taken in this, and the fact that you have seen the importance and the impact of the information contained within this report therein. Because but for the work that you have put into ensuring, one, that a light has been shed upon the findings in this report, we would not be where we are right now. I don't believe it would have been released. And I don't think at least things we're beginning to talk about the findings. There are individuals within the FJD, within the groups of judges, who were shocked by the findings. White judges, black judges, who have come together to say, hey, what can we do about it? And these are people outside of the AGB who are interested in, trying to come together and work on the issues and to get the conversation moving. So that never would have happened without the work of City Council in ensuring that the report in and of itself has been released. So at least, there are people who've identified themselves as, hey, we want to do the work. We want to come together. We want to make changes. We want to have a conversation, which, are taking steps. Of course, that is something that needs to be done in a professional, educational and training setting as well. But it's good to know that there are people within our bench who want to see change happen and who want to work in that direction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Member.
Thank you for your responses, judges. I appreciate you both, and offer my condolences for all you and your staff had to go through.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions for these witnesses, thank you again for your testimony.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
I
Mr.
just
Jones.
want to also just reiterate what you mentioned, Councilman, Mr. Chairman Jones. I want to thank, again, the two of you for being courageous, the two of you for speaking truth to power. And we will continue to stay on top of this issue to focus on results. And we're not having a hearing for the sake of having a hearing. But we thank you two for stepping up to the plate and addressing this issue. So thank you very much, and God bless.
And thank you, Councilman Jones. Can I quickly just give you the three issues that you asked for?
Yes.
I took some notes.
Okay.
And it'll be quick. The
All right.
first thing that I would say that I would like to see is, as I said just a second ago, is that the AGB held accountable for their inaction and the suppression of this report. The second thing would be the hiring of an outside diversity and inclusion officer, which needs to be, it shouldn't be now, we didn't like the report of CURE, whose president happens to be Black, so now we're going to get a non-Black person to come in and finish the work, but to hire a Black person or person of color to address these issues, who would have power to implement change and conduct equity studies for pay, as well as equity studies for the positions themselves. And finally, I would say training for all judges and staff and employees on racism, anti-racism, diversity, and equity, not implicit bias, but specifically explicit and overt bias training. And I guess the little asterisk or 3.5 would be more specifically to me. I just want the retaliation and the retribution that's been directed at me to stop, because while it may continue, I'm not going to stop. That's my commitment and promise to all of you. I'm not going to stop doing and what I'm doing and speaking out. So thank you all very much for these hearings, and thank you for inviting us both to come and speak.
Judge Covington, you're not off the hook. Give me 3.
You're muted.
Sorry, I can't give you 3, Councilman.
Give me one
So,
good.
But I can follow up with Judge Simmons. I really think that this CURE report must be swiftly addressed, first with an investigation, followed by educational initiatives. There must be disciplinary actions if necessary, pertaining to some of the issues involved therein. And there has to be some form of restorative justice pertaining to the issues that have arisen from it.
Those are solid. Thank you both for your testimony. And as Member Johnson said, we take them to heart.
And thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Samantha Williams, who is the next witness to testify?
Our next two witnesses are Dominique Ward and Michael Cord.
All right. Good afternoon, and thank you both for your patience. So you mentioned Michael Cord first?
Well, I'll defer to Ms. Ward.
There you go. All right. Chivalry is not dead.
It is not. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chairperson Jones and Councilperson Johnson, for inviting the Barristers Association to speak on this matter. I know that a statement was issued back in July of this year, and so I wanted to basically reiterate that and also submit that for consideration with my testimony, and then add any additional statements that I might have because I did not necessarily draft the statement. So starting with that, I'll read that into the record. So, the barristers issued a joint statement with the Clifford Scott Green chapter of the NBA Judicial Council back in July of this year. And one of the main things that I want to highlight is the fact that we do chronicle that Judge Karen Yvette Simmons was verbally attacked, based on the hateful, sexist, and racist anonymous message that she received when she was running for president judge for the municipal court. And because of that, it was from that, to our knowledge, that the AGB commissioned the diversity and inclusion consultant to conduct surveys and provide recommendations to address any issues identified by that survey. Now, the surveys were concluded in May of 2019. The survey results and recommendations were finalized in July of 2019, but for some reason, unbeknownst to us, it was not released for over a year. And with that, when the determinations came from the report, it was clear that there were some real issues that were going on in the First Judicial District. Mainly, some things that I want to highlight is that the report illuminated a culture of nepotism, mistrust, and racial tension that is constantly brewing and occasionally bubbling to the surface. Found that women of color, including female judges of color, are experiencing specific harm within the FJD's organizational culture and structure, and observed in qualitative data a troubling pattern of racial resentment among some white staff and judges. Furthermore, I would like to highlight that we did commend that the administrative governing body did make these important findings public, although later, but they were made public. The first step, at least from the barristers and also with the Clifford Scott Green NBA Judicial Council, was that acknowledging that there was a problem and that there still needed to be real work that was being done to root out the documented deep-seated nepotism and racial bias that undermines the FJD, and as an effective organization and erodes confidence in the effective administration of justice. Now, that was issued earlier this year, and sadly, based on the testimony that I heard today, I see the needle has not moved and nothing has happened. There was one more note that was not highlighted in our previous statement that I did want to bring to the attention from the CURE report that I felt like wasn't mentioned earlier, and I think it's also extremely problematic, is that one of the conclusions was we find that among some white staff and judges, there's a sense of disbelief that institutional and structural racism are a significant factor in modern society. Now, with my testimony today, I would like to say that the barrister still stands by the statement that was issued back in July, and that we still feel the same way, that there needs to be something done to address the racial inequities that goes into disparate treatment of female judges of color that are currently sitting on the bench, as well as it relates to salary inequities that were also found by the report. But I'd like to also echo the statements that were made by Judge Covington, by Judge Simmons, and Councilperson Jim, that when you have individuals that are presiding over your judicial system where justice is supposed to be blind, and they don't even believe that institutional and structural racism is a reality, I don't understand how anyone is getting a fair day in court as it relates to lawyers that are advocating and as it relates to constituents of Philadelphia. And with that being said, I do echo Dr. Lubin, as she highlighted earlier, that there was supposed to be diversity training that should have been conducted in conjunction with the CURE report. And at this time, the barristers, along with this official statement, I do want to update to highlight that we are requesting that that training occur. It is clearly there is an issue that is going on, that is deep-seated, that is rooted, and it is affecting all those who are coming across the First Judicial District, and we need to see change.
Thank you so much. We're going to hold questions until Mr. Court testifies, and we'll question you both as a panel. Mr. Court.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I appreciate not only what you're doing, I appreciate what Councilman Johnson did in sponsoring this or introducing this, and then the sponsors, who I believe include Councilpersons Gautier and Thomas and Green. I believe Councilman Squilla and Gim were also on this call, a part of it. So I want to thank you all for that. And the second thing I have to say before I begin my prepared statement, which is only going to be about 5 minutes long, I've often testified at council hearings, and each one that I've testified at, council has taken the matter seriously. But there has never been a hearing that I was a part of where council members treated an issue as serious as you are. I mean, you all are attentive, you're asking probing questions, you're asking follow-up, and it's not for show. You all are serious about this, and I'm so glad you are. Having said that, and one other comment I need to make before I get into my prepared statement, big shout out to Councilman Green, because he started out by quoting the greatest group in hip hop history. And let me just put on my professor hat for a second. When I talk about hip hop, I'm not talking about the garbage you see and hear on radio and TV. That has no more to do with hip hop than Kenny G has to do with jazz. And Kenny G ain't jazz, and the garbage you see and hear on radio is not hip hop. But for me, hip hop is the grandchild of the blues and the children of jazz. Having said that, and I'm going to paraphrase what Councilman Green talked about in quoting a few lines from a song by Public Enemy from way back in 1988, Black Steel in the Hour of Chaos. And to paraphrase it, what they said basically is this: we got a letter from the judicial branch the other day. We opened and read it. It thought we were suckers. And that's exactly what they must think you all are. I mean, the degree of disrespect, and I would argue racist disrespect, because you can't tell me that if there were a city council that consisted primarily of Irish folks or Jewish folks or Asian folks or any other ethnic group, and a member of that group had been attacked, that the Judicial Council would not be front and center in dealing with it, then you're deluding yourself. Having said that, and I'm, again, in addition to you all expressing your concern in substance, I'm also pleased that you express your concern about the fact that they're not here. I mean, you all made it clear that you're offended by it, and whatever you can do, whether it includes issuing subpoenas at some time in the future, withholding funding at some time in the future, whatever, everything's on the table. Having said that, and somebody else alluded to the fact that if the disrespect is being directed toward the judges, black judges, and it is, and the disrespect is being shown to not only city council, but a predominantly black city council, what happens to Raheem from the projects when he's accused of a crime and walks into the courtroom? If you're going to diss the judge, if you're going to diss city council, then Raheem and LaQuisha don't have a chance. And I think we ought to keep that in mind. I noticed the language of the resolution 200485. It talks about its concern in connection with the CURE report regarding racism, nepotism, and mistrust. And I appreciate the way it was framed and the way it was laid out. But I'd make the argument that the word nepotism and the word mistrust, both of them were unnecessary, because it's all about racism. Because nepotism means that you hire and promote people like you. your friends, your relatives. So when we talk about nepotism, that's synonymous with racism. When we talk about the mistrust, we're talking about mistrust from a race perspective. So even though the Cure report and the resolution use the three terms, racism, nepotism, and mistrust, it all comes down to racism. Having said that, I did submit to Councilman Kenyatta Johnson a copy of my 4-page letter, which addresses the concerns I'm going to raise. And I'm not going to read that entire letter or take too long. I'm going to limit myself to an additional 3 or 4 minutes because you all have the gist of what we're talking about here. And what we're talking about here is institutional and structural racism within the courts. And normally I speak very fast, but I'm going to try to slow down what I say to avoid getting myself in trouble. And what I mean by that is this. Big shout out to the sisters who stood up. I mean, we got Judge Simmons and we got Judge Covington and we have the president of the Barristers Association, Ms. Ward. I wish I could sit here as not just the only man in the courtrooms every day who's not afraid to speak up. Am I saying that the other Black lawyers who go to the Stout Justice Center every day are afraid? No, not necessarily. Am I saying Black male lawyers? Am I saying the same thing about Black male judges? No, I'm not. But I wish they were here like Judge Simmons is here. I wish they were here like Judge Covington is here. I wish they were here like Attorney Ward is here. But unfortunately, they're not. You can read into it whatever you want to. That letter that I alluded to is dated October 21. It's addressed to the Honorable IDC Fox in her role as chair of the Administrative Governing Board and President Judge of the Court of Common Pleas. And in that letter, and I'm going to summarize it, if anybody wants access to it, it is part of my testimony. But in that letter, I point out that on June 4, 2020, the Washington State Supreme Court, including each of its 7 white justices, along with its 1 Black and 1 brown justice, published a powerful letter necessarily proclaiming the following. And what they wrote, this is the Washington State Supreme Court, it sounds like something I wrote as the angriest Black man in America, but I applaud these justices for calling it what it is. Here's what they wrote in pertinent part. The devaluation and degradation of Black lives are a persistent and systemic injustice. We continue to see racialized policing and the overrepresentation of Black Americans in every stage of our criminal justice system. Our institutions remain in 2020 affected by the vestiges of slavery, Jim Crow laws that were never dismantled, and racist court decisions that were never disavowed. So you have a Supreme Court acknowledging that, but it wasn't just that Supreme Court. You got the Supreme Courts of Alaska, California, Connecticut, DC, Georgia, Hawaii, and about 8 or 9 others that are using that same language in 2020. Unfortunately, of those approximately 20 Supreme Courts, it doesn't include the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. It doesn't include Philadelphia's First Judicial District. So I'm wondering what's going on. And I love the fact that the Washington State Supreme Court talked about racist laws that were never dismantled and racist court decisions that were never disavowed. You all would be shocked. Even the lawyers on City Council would be shocked to know that the 1857 Dred Scott decision saying that Black folks have no rights that white folks are bound to respect has never been overturned. Not only has the Dred Scott decision never been overturned, 4 years ago, in 2016, the Solicitor General of the state of Kansas cited the Dred Scott decision in a brief he filed. Think about that for a second. That the top lawyer of a state in the United States just 4 years ago cited the Dred Scott decision in his brief. If anybody wants to get more information, just Google Hodes versus Smith, Hodes. That's Hodes versus Smith, a 2016 case coming out of Kansas. So when the Washington State Supreme Court talks about racist court decisions that have never been disavowed, they're talking about things like that. Let me quickly jump to the second page of my 4-page letter. And I promise I'm going to wrap this up in 2 minutes. The letter goes on to talk about that very same devaluation and degradation of Black lives as a persistent and systemic injustice happens right here in Philadelphia, and nobody in authority is saying anything about it or doing anything about it. And the fact that the Cure report addresses it, that's a wonderful thing, because we need to see what's going on. Philadelphia's judicial system is like a kitchen from a distance. From a distance, the kitchen might be, you look at the kitchen, you say, wow, that's a beautiful kitchen. And it looks wonderful from a distance. But as you get close up to it and then turn the lights, the rats and roaches begin running around in the kitchen. You don't see them when it's dark, but you all of a sudden in that beautiful kitchen, in this beautiful courthouse, when the light comes on, and the Cure report is that light. It's showing them the mice. It's showing the rats. It's showing the roaches. And somebody ought to do something about it. You would think that since this council is saying, hey, we are interested in serving as exterminators to get rid of the rats and roaches. Hey, FJD, are you willing to come to us and tell us what part of the kitchen the roaches are, the rats are, the mice are? You can help us do something. Well, for whatever reason, the First Judicial District has decided to allow the kitchen to remain as infested as it is. I also go on in the letter to point out that the report exposes, and this is critically important, there are several conclusions drawn by the Cure report, but I highlight 4 of them, and very quickly. Number 1, Philadelphia's court system is immersed in, quote, racial tension, unquote. That's important. Racial tension inside of a courthouse, that's some serious stuff. Number 2, among some white judges and white court staff, there is a, quote, troubling pattern of racial resentment, unquote. Why in the world any white person would ever have any racial resentment toward any Black person is mind-boggling to me. All we did was get kidnapped. All we did was get enslaved. All we did was get sharecropped and Jim Crowed and mass incarcerated. Whatever kind of resentment you would have toward us is literally mind-boggling. But for me, number 3 is critically important in terms of what was exposed in the Cure report. Number 3, some white judges do not believe, quote, that institutional and structural racism even exists, unquote. Think about that. There are judges who don't believe that there is institutional and structural racism. I would love to speak to each of those judges and say to them, hey, Your Honor, let's say tomorrow you had to be a defendant in a criminal case, and all things being equal, as a defendant, you got the same income, you practice the same religion, you got the same job, everything's equal. But you can choose to be a Black defendant or a white defendant. Which would you choose, Your Honor? And the fact that every single white judge, because they all have brains, would choose to be a white defendant as opposed to a Black defendant tells you there must be institutional and structural racism. And even before you get in the courthouse, let's say you're driving down the street, you're a student at Temple University, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you're driving down Broad and you'll see some more. Lights and sirens from a police car go off behind you. And as that cop approaches you, you could be a Black driver or a white driver. Which one would you select? Everybody would choose a white driver. Why? Because of institutional and structural racism. And number 4, some white judges and white court staff, quote, believe that reverse racism is as significant as anti-Black racism. I'm not going to use the profanity that went through my head when I first read that, but the fact that a white person, especially somebody went to college, went to law school, graduated, passed the bar, became a judge, so they have some intellect. They have to understand that racism is a systemic thing, not an individual thing. A Black person can be prejudiced, a Black person can be bigoted, but a Black person can't be a racist because racism is about a systemic thing. You look at the most powerful Black man in American history in terms of politics, President Barack Obama. He couldn't even get done what he wanted done, and he's a Black man. So clearly, for a judge to say that reverse racism, 1, exists, and 2, that it's significant as anti-Black racism is mind-boggling. I've never heard of a white person who was kidnapped from Europe. I never heard of a white person that was enslaved in America, lynched and raped and castrated and sharecropped and all that stuff. But the fact that there are judges on the bench who have awesome powers. One, they can take away your property by imposing a fine. Two, they can take away your freedom by throwing you in jail. Four, they can take away your children through a custody order. Four, they can take away your life to the death penalty. That these white judges with those four awesome powers think that there's such thing as reverse racism, absolutely horrible. And I'll wrap it up by going into a little bit of detail, more detail than the Honorable Judge Simmons did about what happened to her. Let me just read what I wrote in the Tribune shortly after this happened. And I'll wrap this up in less than a minute and a half, 2 minutes. On December 11, 2018, someone with official access to the robing room, which is a private area for judges in the Juanita Kidd Stout Justice Center, left an interdepartmental envelope addressed to the Honorable Judge Karen Simmons, who at the time was one of 3 candidates running for President Judge Municipal Court. Inside that envelope was a note to her stating verbatim in all caps, quote, "There will never be a Black bitch running our court. You won't be President Judge." 3 exclamation points. "Keep MC Court great." 2 exclamation points. Nobody has been, there's nothing, in fact, let me just read this last part. So far, nearly 2 years later, no one is saying whether the possible suspect is a fellow judge, a judicial officer, or someone else. But the matter was so serious in terms of potential violence against Judge Simmons that the police commissioner, at the time a Black man, and the sheriff, at the time a Black man, did provide round-the-clock escort protection. But you had nothing from the FJD. In fact, without exposing too much, I was so outraged that I reached out to some of my friends in the Nation of Islam to provide FOI security and protection for the judge. It shouldn't be incumbent upon me to find some Black men to protect a Black woman judge. The court system should do it itself. Finally, 3 things that I'm asking for, the Honorable Karen Simmons is asking for, and every other courageous Black judge is asking for. This is in the letter. Number 1, this is what we're asking for, 3 things. Number 1, the immediate implementation of the conclusion and recommendations on pages 44 to 47 of the 56-page CURE report. Number 2, the immediate creation and funding of an independent position/office responsible for implementation and oversight consistent with the aforementioned conclusion and recommendations. And finally, number 3, the immediate implementation and circulation of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's policy on non-discrimination and equal employment opportunity to all FJD employees, staff, and judges. And once again, I just want to thank City Council for taking this matter seriously. And I know that the judges are listening because the Legal Intelligencer, the local lawyers newspaper, has already published an article about how you in City Council are outraged that you were disrespected by the judges the way you were. So the stuff has hit the fan. Thanks to you all. Let's get into more good trouble.
Professor Cole, we appreciate your unique lens and insight on how these kinds of issues have a historic basis and a current day relevance. So we appreciate it. Are members of the committee, any questions?
Mr. Chair, I just want to thank Attorney Michael Core and thank Attorney Dominique Ward for taking time out of their busy schedule for being here and participating on this very critical and important issue. There's a quote that says, "Power conceives nothing without a demand, never have and never will." And so we thank you for stepping up to the plate and adding additional substance to the advocacy around this issue. So I want to personally say thank you for your time.
Yes, certainly welcome.
Member Green, did I see you?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Attorneys Ward and Cord for your testimony this afternoon. Just wanted to just ask both of you just a few brief questions. Both of you as attorneys and have been in front of a judge before. And from your experience, if you were in front of a judge and then you left that judge to take care of some other matters, and you heard that the judge wants you to come back into the courtroom, would you go back into the courtroom at your earliest convenience, or at least let people know why you could or could not come back into the courtroom?
Well, I'll start out. The answer is not only would I, I've done that. I was on my way to Harrisburg about a year and a half ago. A judge called me about a question, and based on the fact that that is a judge and I wasn't in another courtroom, I just made a U-turn, traveled 45 minutes back to Philadelphia to spend 4 minutes answering a question the judge has. It's a matter of respect. And as a lawyer in that courtroom, I felt that judge, as a judge and elected official, deserved that respect. I gave it.
Yes, I completely echo that. There's a level of deference, respect, and regard you give a judge. So the moment that you drop what you're doing and you go back and you find out what the judge wanted and you respond accordingly because you are an advocate first and foremost.
Right. So you would not have to receive a subpoena just to respond to a judge asking you to come back into a courtroom to answer a question they may have or questions they may have?
No.
The short answer is no. If I had to get a subpoena, I'd be in much bigger trouble than a subpoena.
Exactly. So I'm just making sure, just trying to continue to establish the record in reference to the fact that this is a legislative body, a co-equal branch of government, and the fact that me made a simple request for the judicial branch to come and follow up on some questions that we asked, and they chose not to do so. So I just wanted to just continue that understanding, because from my understanding, back when I was practicing, as an assistant district attorney or in other matters, if a judge asked me to come to a courtroom, I would do that. I would not have to receive a subpoena to do so. It's just a matter of respect and courtesy that I think that people of co-equal branches would receive just to appear. I mean, my understanding initially, we received a letter that a representative of the court system would be here to testify. And then we received some additional information that we received a written statement in lieu of that testimony. And I'll venture both for attorneys Ward and Cord that if you had received a request that you learned about from a judge, you would not say, oh, let me write down a written statement and have someone deliver it to that judge on your behalf in response to their request for you to appear in court regarding questions that that judge may have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Duly noted, Member Green. Are there any other questions for this panel?
I just had a brief comment, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Member Gim.
Thank you very much. I also wanted to thank Michael for your steering testimony here and just laying it out, I think, with the amount of frustration, also trying to figure out what we do next. And then, Dominique, it's a pleasure to reconvene, although under circumstances that we would, really like to not confront. However, that being said, I think that, would love to hear from you about how much you think this issue has permeated throughout the barristers, and whether I know you obviously have taken a formal role with the leadership, but with a lot of your members, are there other things that you think there are actions that barristers might take that City Council should be aware of and be in partnership with you all on?
Well, I don't want to misspeak because our advisory board and our executive board are made up of individuals at different points in their career and different facets. So I'll speak on behalf of myself and things that I would try to lead the barristers as a charge with, and I would have to take it back to them for a final confirmation. First and foremost, I actually am quite close with Judge Simmons. She is like an adoptive parent to me. So when everything happened with her, and that note, I remember that very clear as day. And so as a result, that was a personal affront to me as well as other Black women that practice in this area. And so to see things evolve the way they have. It's a personal effort in my mind, and efforts for us to really work closely with the legislative branch as well as the judiciary in order to make sure that things are actually being done to move this needle. We spoke out back in July, initially after the CURE report came out. And again, as I stated in my testimony, we are still a proponent of making sure that there's some real articulable, intentional changes that are going on. I would definitely be supporting of the fact that if there was a diversity training that was enveloped with this report and the recommendations, again, as in our statement, and I still support to this day, we, again, along with Michael Cord and Judge Simmons, we are asking the First Judicial Court to implement the recommendations that were given. I mean, the CURE Institute is a very robust organization. This is their specialty. They know what they're doing. They're an expert in this area. I don't think any of the recommendations were lifts that were unrealistic or unfair or biased. I think they were valid, and they were, as to me, as accurate as you're going to get from somebody looking at this coming outside in. This is not legislative branch barristers or somebody asking them to do something that they should not be willing to do. They subject themselves to the report, and as such, I think that they should be implementing what actually is in the report. And we would obviously want to assist in making sure that happens because, as I said in my testimony, if there is a belief that institutional racism is a fairy tale for some people, then when you have individuals that come to your court and are trying to explain their story and what's happening to them, or why their contacts with the police are in excess, or why they're having these issues, if you don't think that they're starting off at a handicap, if you feel like they're asking for a handout, or believe this is a reverse racism, I'm quoting things directly from the conclusions, then automatically your own biases are going to bleed into your ability to actually adjudicate them. Justice is supposed to be a blind entity. I don't know how you can be blind if you're walking into believing that everyone is trying to get a handout, or in some degrees is acting in a space where they are just trying to get over on the system. And that was what I pulled from my interpretations from the conclusion of reports. So I would definitely support that. Also, I do feel wholeheartedly that training helps. I don't know why we don't have a training procedure in place, but I wholeheartedly support that there should be training that's done. And again, if there's any way the barristers can assist in advocating for that within reason, we will.
Yeah. And I hope that, other associations, Asian American Bar Association, APABA, and others, the Bar Association overall, can also take this up. This is not on the Black community to be dealing with. Like, it is not right that, and while, of course, absolutely at the leadership of addressing it, but it is in the broader interest of the justice community to see a judiciary that is responsive and responsible for addressing race, sexual violence, gender issues, and all the other issues that we see all communities come before our judges in our First Judicial District. If we want parity at all, but we can't talk about race, and we can't talk about power, and we can't talk about Black women in particular being excluded, harassed, and then dismissed, we are not going to seek justice as a broader community. And so, if there are other ways that, I can be supportive, and other ways that council should be picking up this call and ensuring that, deeply grateful that the barristers has been such a proud and strong voice and leader, but other associations representing lawyers, the legal community, professional associations need to recognize that all of us have something at stake here when these issues are swept under the rug. So I want to thank you, to thank both of you, and especially for your leadership, Dominique, as president of the barristers. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I have a point of information.
Give me 1 second, Member Johnson. So, no, go ahead. You go first.
No, I just wanted to state for the record that we did reach out to the Bar Association, and the Chancellor declined to participate in the hearing, just for the record.
Thank you, Member Johnson, for setting that straight. So, panel, Judge Higginbotham, Ben Johnson, may remember him. You might have to Google him. But also Cecil B. Moore. Right now, would be clapping, saying that the future for law in the city of Philadelphia is bright because of the two of you. And I thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Williams.
So we're going to move on to our public comment session. We had 3 people sign up requesting to testify. That would be Bridget Powell, April McBride, and Adrian Haggins.
What in that order?
Sure. Yes.
Ms. Powell, can you hear us?
I can.
Good evening, and thank you for your patience.
No problem. It was well worth wait. I heard a lot, learned a lot, saw some familiar faces, and I want to thank you for having this session. A lot of the council members are probably familiar with myself as I've come to many of your offices, or I've actually reached out to you via email or text. As you know, I'm actually an aunt who is in the midst of fighting a really 4-year battle of the judicial system, who has, I'm in family court, and right now, this is the only courtroom where I know you walk in guilty until you're proven innocent. Basically, I'm not saying that parents are not needing help or services, but what I'm saying is that judges are actually the elephant in the courtroom most of the time. A lot of times there's no evidence presented. Social workers are committing perjury and they're deemed as credible. In the family court system, 85% of people of color are in the system, yet we definitely know that we're not 86% of the population in Philadelphia. Right now, we know that children issues are very sensitive. Courtroom is even closed to close family members, meaning the grandmother can't enter, the aunt can't enter, and basically that's a real detriment for the children because they're being put in foster care, and by the time we attain lawyers to get in there, the judge is saying, well, where you been all this time? So if I had 3 asks, I would ask that parents are always given a choice of having a lawyer, but what I would ask is that they be allowed to select their lawyer from the list of the ones that are given. I recently read an article where there are some attorneys who have over 300 cases. So that means 100 cases per month are what they're dealing with. So they can't possibly give quality, whereas some lawyers only have 20 or 30 off the list. My second ask was to open up the courtrooms and even maybe just to family, so that family can get in there and show that they are willing and able to take care of these children that are put in the system. And then my third ask is to maybe have the parents decide whether or not the judge makes the decision, or maybe there's a trial by their peers, because what's happening right now in the family court system must end because it's just not right. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Ms. Powell, thank you for your consistency. You ain't letting this go.
I'm not.
That's a testimony.
Yes.
Testament to your character.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Now, wait a minute. Repeat those real quick. So there should be access to the courtroom.
Open courtrooms. And that should be up to the parent's choice. If the parent decides they don't want the courtroom open, that's fine. Parents should be able to decide whether they would have a jury trial by their peers based on their evidence, and for parents to be allowed to select from the list of court-appointed attorneys.
God.
Not just one given to them, and that's just what's happening right now. The judge decides who's the attorney for the parent.
Got it. Those seem reasonable, and
To me, I'm a reasonable person, Councilman Jones. I try and be reasonable. I work in high school, so that's all I can be is reasonable.
all right now. See you
Thank
soon.
you. See you tomorrow.
All right. Thank you for your testimony. Who's next, Miss Williams?
April McBride.
Ms. McBride, thank you for your patience. State your name for the record and begin your testimony.
Good evening, everyone. My name is April McBride. I, too, along with Bridget Powell, have had many issues. Well, not many, just one particular issue with the family court system. And actually, before I begin, I'm going to speak on the mistrust and also the racism in family court. I just did an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer. I don't know if y'all can see it or not. Wait, let me put my camera up. And it's about being placed on a registry without a hearing. Placed on the child abuse registry without a hearing. And not only me, I could send you a copy also through email. But not only me, but thousands of people have been placed on the registry. And like Bridget Powell said, in family court, you're proven guilty. You're guilty until proven innocent. Now, on paper, they have me guilty. I know I'm innocent. My lawyer said I was innocent, and I went. The judge also blocked my appeal to Superior Court. I have actual proof documentation in regards to the judge doing that, and then also at my very last transcript, my court transcript, because my case closed within 3 months once they realized that I had a paying lawyer. And the case closed in 3 months. The judge, but DHS accused me of child abuse, which was totally false. They didn't have any substantial evidence, no doctor report, anything. It was just a retaliation because I stood up for my rights. Now, the judge, my lawyer asked the judge at the end of my hearing, his request had nothing to do with custody. It was the aspect of him ordering my character as a child abuser. The judge then said, I didn't say anything about child abuse today. I was never deemed a child abuser from what this judge is saying, but CLS was doing a child abuse registry, and I applied for it. And in the child abuse registry, from the staff attorney from the CLS, she said, unfortunately, we cannot help you appeal your child abuse record because you are past due to appeal, which we appealed. But like I said, it got kicked back because the family court judge already made a finding that you committed child abuse. Now, this judge said at the final court hearing that he didn't say that I was a child abuser and he didn't characterize me as one, and told me I could go home and live life as normal with my daughter. But I'm stuck in this system for almost 3 years with my name on the registry. I'm in the medical field. I work for the federal government, and I've been working my behind off to get this stuff overturned. And I had actual proof that I had to send to the Inquirer reporter for her to do this story. She wouldn't have did this story out of just, me saying it happened. I have all documentation, a transcript stating this judge said he never called me an abuser, and I'm not an abuser. So why is my name on the registry? That's number one. And it needs to be taken off ASAP. And number two, like I said, I have documentation from when I paid $1,700 for my paid lawyer, to appeal this judge's reconsideration. And the judge did not want to reconsider, his case against me. So therefore, when I filed the Superior Court appeal, the judge fast-tracked my case on purpose so it could get thrown out for timely filing. I have all the proof right here. And they also stated that he had substantial evidence of what he was stating that I was accused of. But in the document of the transcript, it states that he was not calling me that or characterizing me that. You probably can't see it, but I can come to your office and show you everything. So I have actual proof that, first of all, my constitutional rights were violated because he purposely railroaded my appeal. My case was never a fast track case. He put it on fast track and also said he had substantial evidence that I did this. There was no reports, no medical reports, nothing. Then my daughter testified that I didn't do anything inside of the judge's chambers, and they concealed her document. They concealed her testimony on the documents. My lawyer was there as a witness. So just because I stood up for my rights, they retaliated against me. Now I'm sitting here with my name in the system. I can't even move forward in my job because I don't want them to run my name and something happens. And also, normally I work contract jobs on the side for quite a few medical hospitals across the country. I can't do that right now. Not at all. So I'm happy that this is definitely coming to the forefront. And once again, like Bridget Powell, I've been coming to to all of the meetings, the resolution hearings, etc. Helping out with Councilman. Councilman O has been helping us out, and Councilwoman Cindy Bass and you as well. As far as the resolution that was passed, but me, I'm still in the clutches trying to get my name cleared.
So Michael Court talked about the awesome power that is given to a judge, and one of those powers is to be able to remove a child from a family environment, and then, in your case, set into motion a whole series of catastrophic events that impact your well-being and your livelihood.
Yes.
So we're sorry for what you're going through, but thank you for your testimony to put it on the record.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.
Ms. Williams?
Adrian Haggins.
Ms. Haggins? Can you hear us? We can't hear you. Can you take your...
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. There you go.
Okay. All right. Well, I just called. Well, I figured I would be called now. Get on now. I'm on my way to work, so I had to pull over. I'm calling because I've been going through all the court systems with this illegal eviction, identity theft, mortgage fraud. It started at municipal court. I couldn't even get no legal representation. Whatever they had by my name, I couldn't even get legal representation. I've been to the community legal service. I spoke to several attorneys from the Bar Association. I've been to my state representative, everybody in between, to the FBI, to go to their office to be escorted out. And I already let them know. A lot of things was taken from me. I'm not taking this lightly, and I'm going to continue to fight with somebody help or without nobody help. The Superior Court is the next highest court of the United States. I appealed. I had to Google how to do a brief on my own. I turned in a brief, and they still quashed my case and ruled in favor of the landlord-tenant thing, which was illegal because I have no idea who the person was that took me to court. Mind you, it shouldn't have even left the municipal court.
When does this?
I appealed to the...
Was there an eviction?
Yes, it was.
And when did it happen, if you don't mind me asking?
This happened January the 16th of 2019.
Right.
And in the mix of that, the police came out there. The sheriff's office was there. The police was there. I was tased, taken a friend's Frankfurt area hospital to take the things out, and then taken over to Friends Hospital. And they're trying to keep sweeping everything up underneath the rug, but I told them already it's not going down like that. I'm sorry, it's not going down like that. They removed all my belongings from the house, which Superior Moving and Storage works for the city of Philadelphia. They contract with the city of Philadelphia. All my son PlayStation, he had 4 different consoles, game consoles. All his games were stolen. My grandmother, and there's no value to that ring. That's my late grandmother's ring. And, they just took everything from me.
So can you, Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Do you have her contact information?
Yes, I do.
All right. I'd like to take this off of television at this point and see if we can't get some help for her.
Okay,
If that's okay with you.
that sounds great.
Okay, that's
I wasn't talking
fine
about.
with me.
Okay.
All right.
It's fine with me. My life been in an uproar for that. I'm 50 years old. I work. I have excellent credit, and I'm not going to let them just take whatever they want from me. I'm sorry, and I explained it to all of them.
All right. Well, we will get the details and see what we can come up with for some assistance. All right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for your testimony.
Oh, you're welcome. Let me head on it for the next 12 hours.
All right now.
Okay. Have a good night.
You as well.
Okay. Bye.
Are there any others to testify on this resolution?
There are no other witnesses.
Are there any other entities that wish to comment?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank you and my colleagues for your participation in this hearing, your questioning during this hearing. It's just mind-boggling that in year 2020, right, that we're still dealing with the same type of systematic and institutional racism that our forefathers have been addressing, even from the period of time where I remember when the ballots used to come out for individuals to run for judge, we didn't even have any black individuals on the ballot. And I remember the advocacy around that particular issue. But also what really strikes to the core is when you have constituents who take time out of their schedule and give public comment and talk about their interactions. And so obviously, if we can't get it right with the leadership at the executive level, then surely those individuals who are coming to get service by our court system probably aren't receiving a fair shake. And again, I'll go on the record as saying that the lack of having no representation here by FJD is just indicative of the entire environment that is being operated over in our court system. But more importantly, it goes to a wider systematic issue around being indifferent to basically black issues. I mean, there's nothing more to say other than that. And so I will regroup with my colleagues and we'll continue to advocate and work with the judges around, particularly black judges around this particular issue. So I want to thank everybody for their comments, their questioning, and their concerns around this very important issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Member Johnson, for bringing it up. Are there any other members wishing to comment?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes Member Green.
I just have a quick question. Like other legislative matters that would come before a committee, once a resolution is introduced, that matter is generally recessed either to a date certain or the call of the chair. Considering that we're still in a 4-year legislative session that will not end to sine die, which is December 31st of 2023. I just want to make sure I understand for the record, both from the sponsor of this resolution, Councilmember Johnson, the chair of this committee, that this resolution matter will be recessed to the call of the chair, and that we are in a 4-year session of this legislative body. Just want to make sure that's my understanding based on my perspective.
Yes, thank you, Councilman Jones. And I'm glad you reminded me because I had this question asked to me earlier today, so we can stay on top of this issue. But yes, we would like for the hearing to not to end, but to be recessed into the call of the chair.
Okay.
And one other point, my understanding, based on the current rules of council that were adopted when this legislative body was sworn in January, the first Tuesday of this year, that in the rules that were adopted by this body, which was passed as a resolution, it includes in that language, unlike in years past, that currently council has the ability to use other means if necessary, like subpoena and other matters, without having to introduce a resolution to do such. I think that's also my understanding under the current rules of council that were adopted by the 17 members of council by resolution. Is that my understanding is correct?
Is absolutely correct, Member Green.
Just want to make sure I have a full understanding of all of the information and the means of how we are operating as a legislative body. Thank you, Councilmember Johnson, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Do I see Member Squilla? Did you want to say something, Member Squilla?
No, I'm still here. No, I just want to thank you all for the hearing. Very informative, and looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Seeing no other members to comment, we will recess to the call of the chair, resolution number 200485. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr.
We
Chair.
appreciate you. Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. If we're probably off the air now, right?
I've never been on there.
That's up to Modesto. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Modesto.
I'm going to check on that with council before I bring back to you.
Hey, yeah, Modesto plays with her, Mike. Mutes us, unmutes us, you know. We know Modesto. Take care, guys.